For centuries, there have been tales of beings, some human and some not, living in the vast cavities that exist deep beneath the surface of the Earth. But exactly who or what these beings are and what they want is open to question. Sometimes these tales are based on half-remembered rumors, and there has seldom been anything definite. But there are also ancient structures, such as the necropolis called the Hal Salflieni Hypogeum in Malta, that helps corroborate such tales. This strange subterranean construction, which dates from around 4000 BCE, is one of Europe's only known Neolithic underground dwellings. Elsewhere, there are several others, including Derinkuyu in Turkey, the underground city of Neyaz in northern France, and of course the fascinating and hauntingly beautiful city of Petra in southern Jordan. Strange indeed, but at least we know they exist. However, there are others that are more questionable, particularly those that hint at the existence of long-lost technologies. One of these is the legendary city of Shin-Au-Av that is said to lie deep below Death Valley, a vast and barren area that straddles the California-Nevada border in the USA. This strange hidden city, whose name means God's land or ghost land, is thought to have contained many anomalous and out-of-place artifacts that should not belong to the era in which it was supposedly built. There are two versions of how this underground city came to being, although they may be closely interlinked. One version implies that it is linked to a race that existed at the dawn of time and had a presence worldwide. They were called the Serpent people. In India, they were known as the Naga, or snakes, and at the Quetzalcoatl, or plumed serpent, in ancient Mexico. The ancient Egyptians called them the Jedhai, and the Chinese knew them as lung or dragons. In ancient Britain, they were called adders, or the serpents of wisdom. Appropriately enough, the name adder is also given to a species of poisonous snake that is indigenous to areas of the UK. It doesn't seem to matter which race encountered them, because they were invariably worshipped and regarded as helpers and prophets. All of the legends that say this mysterious race could either take human or reptilian form, and as is the way with reptiles and snakes, lived below the surface and created underground cities worldwide. Under the guidance of the Serpent people, dragon cultures developed, which normally involved the construction of huge pyramids and other structures covered with serpent motifs. These cultures were hand-ruled by benevolent dragon kings, and even today signs of vanished races are still evident. In fact, these legends associated with the Paiute tribe resonate strongly with other Native American tribes, notably the Hopi and Zuni peoples, whose creation legends also tell of their ancestors' emergence from the dark, subterranean world. It is unlikely that at the dawn of time these people would have direct contact, so it's strange how closely their legends have become intermingled. For many centuries, the legends of the Paiute tribe of North America have told of this lost city, also referred to as the Ghost Land. According to legend, Shin-Au-Av was formed when a young god, Shin-Au-Av, was asked to take a sealed bag across the desert and only open it when he got to the other side. But because he was young and he felt movement inside the bag, the god became curious and opened it, allowing the contents, in this case hordes of human beings, to escape. These people, who eventually became known by the name of the god Shin-Au-Av, saw some mountains in the distance and ran towards them. One of the older gods saw this and demanded to know why he had done this, and a furious row developed. According to the legend, the people heard the heated exchange but could see nothing, so they became afraid and dug a tunnel and hid in it, which is how the underground city was created. These events became part of Paiute creation legends and were adopted into their belief of an afterlife. Another part of this legend tells of how, many centuries later, the wife of a Paiute chief died in childbirth, and in his grief he wanted to be reunited with her, so traveled to the land of the dead. This involved passing through a miles-long underground passage, and on his journey he was attacked by the fearsome creatures that lived there. Finally, he got to the end of the passage and found himself standing at the end of a narrow bridge carved from the solid rock. The bridge crossed what he looked like a bottomless chasm. He crossed the bridge and finally arrived in the land of the dead, which was ruled over by Shin-Au-Av. One of the inhabitants met him, a strangely beautiful female with snake-like features, who took him into a huge open area. Here he saw thousands of dead members of his tribe dancing. He asked if his wife was with them. His guide told him she was, and that once he had found her, they must both immediately leave the valley, and, common with Lot's wife in the Bible, should not any account look back for any reason. The chief promised to do this, and he watched the dancers for several hours until he saw his wife. He called out to her and she turned and saw him. She left the dancers and ran towards him, and they promptly fled to the rock ridge, leaving from Shin-Au-Av to the cavern and the world above. However, he forgot his promise and turned to take one look back at where he'd been, and as he did so, his wife and the city immediately disappeared. Once he had recovered from the shock, he made his way out of the cavern and rejoined his tribe. He spent the rest of his life describing the peace, happiness, and beauty that he had found in the underground land. Legends like this were forgotten until, in 1947, they resurfaced when an article appeared in the San Diego Union Tribune. The article mentioned that several years previously, the remains of an ancient civilization had been found in the desert. These remains included an underground city containing gigantic skeletons and mummies wearing leather clothing, and the walls of the city were covered with strange carvings and images. This article also stated that in 1931, an archaeologist had located tunnels leading to the city underneath Death Valley, and he intended to excavate and explore his find. He said that work had already started removing the skeletons from the caverns, most of which were between 8 and 9 feet long. The article also suggested that out-of-place artifacts had been found, indicating that there was a level of technology present that was unlike the rest of the find. Like the mummies, the skeletons were still clad in garments, but these were made of hair, and the garments were of medium length, comprising a jacket and knee-length trousers. Initial testing suggested that the remains were in the region of 80,000 years old. It was also stated that another cavern had been found. This cavern, which they called the Temple, had apparently been used for ceremonies or rituals, and it contained objects and strange markings familiar to those used by the Freemasons. A long tunnel from this area led to another room containing the remains of dinosaurs, saber-toothed tigers, elephants, and other animals, which were displayed in alcoves in the walls. The men got the impression that some catastrophe had occurred above ground and people had taken refuge in this elaborate cave system. The dwellings were well equipped, and among the articles found were objects that they could not recognize. And it was not until after 1947 that they were found to be microwave ovens. Furthermore, it appeared that the city had been lit using a form of gaslighting, which had been fueled by sources of natural gas. Elsewhere, there were huge stone doors that seemed to have been operated using a complex system of counterweights. This took the form of hundreds of globes dotted around the cave system. The globes contained pieces of stone that was found to be mildly radioactive, and is thought that at one time may have provided a light source. In addition to this, other totally out-of-place devices resembling radio sets were also found. However, a few days after the first article appeared in the San Diego Union Tribune, another article entitled "Expedition Reports 9-Foot Skeletons" appeared in another Nevada newspaper, the now defunct Hot Citizen. Some view this as no more than something created by a reporter, while others believe the evidence is there and is being kept from the general public. One account from the early 1900s alleges that 2 men were traveling through Death Valley, and one of them allegedly fell into an old mine shaft at a place called Wingate Pass. Fortunately, he was not badly injured and could see odd shapes nearby. He called out to his companion, who climbed down to join him. They found themselves in a cavern, which they claimed to have followed about 20 miles into the heart of the Panamint Mountains. They claimed to have found themselves in another cavern containing a huge ancient underground city. They continued exploring and discovered that they had climbed some distance into the mountains, and although still underground, they could see openings some distance above the ground that led outside. They looked and realized that the valley below had once been underwater, and that the openings appeared to have once been designed to allow vessels to moor alongside. They realized that the valley was once underwater, and they eventually came to the conclusion that the arched openings had been ancient docks for seagoing vessels. The area around Wingate Pass, where the discoveries were made later, became part of the US Navy weapons testing facility at China Lake and is now off limits to the public and is currently impossible to check if any of these claims are accurate. However, governments will always conceal inconvenient evidence from the public. They've done this for decades, and this practice shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. Cosmic rays are atom fragments that rain down on the Earth from an unknown region outside of the solar system. They blaze at the speed of light and have been blamed for electronics problems in satellites and other machinery. Lately, scientists have been using the ability of cosmic rays to penetrate through solid objects to map and measure structures like the Great Pyramid with astonishing results. Using a celestial phenomenon, archaeologists are investigating a mysterious structure buried deep underground in Russia. According to a new study, the structure could be one of the world's oldest Christian churches. The unknown structure lies in the northwestern part of the medieval fortress of Derinkuyu in Serpent, a city located on the Caspian Sea and the southernmost in Russia. The building dates to around 300 AD and was buried 400 years later when the Arabs captured the city. Although archaeologists have known about the 36 feet deep structure for some time, most of it is hidden underground, with just a damaged dome visible above the surface. Consequently, researchers have not been able to access it, as any excavation could endanger the protected UNESCO site. Although the function of the strange building is hotly debated among scholars, archaeologists have always suspected that it was once used as a Christian temple. Other theories suggest that it may have served as a reservoir or even a Zoroastrian fire temple. In fact, there are several historical references to the building being an underground water tank, but as there is another much larger tank at Derinkuyu, this interpretation is obviously problematic. In order to find out what the building actually was, a group of researchers from various Russian institutions, including the Russian Academy of Sciences, attempted to harness a celestial phenomenon called cosmic rays to create a picture of the buried building. Cosmic rays are a form of high-energy radiation that originates from an unknown source outside our solar system and constantly rains down on the Earth. Though the majority of these rays crash into atoms in our planet's upper atmosphere and don't make it to the surface, some, known as muon particles, are ejected from this collision and do hit the Earth's surface. Muons travel through matter at nearly the speed of light, but as they travel through denser objects, they lose energy and decay. So by calculating the number of muons traveling through various parts underground, researchers can paint a picture of an object's density. This technique is known as muon radiography. Utilizing this method, the team placed several detectors inside the building and used nuclear emulsions to create the first images of it. Nuclear emulsion is where photographic plates are used to record the passage of the charged particles passing through. Results of this scan revealed that the building was cross-shaped, lending weight to the theory that it was a church. The measurements of the structure were found to be 36 feet in height, 50 feet in length, north to south, and 44 feet in width, east to west. The arms of the cross were 16 feet wide and 13 feet long. In a statement about their results, the researchers stated that although they didn't believe the structure was built as an underground water tank, they did think that it may have been used for water storage in the 17th and 18th centuries. Although the results of the study may seem a little disappointing, the research team point out that the work wasn't about making a completely new discovery, but rather confirming that the muon radiography method would reveal what the structure looked like. In the near future, the researchers hope to conduct a more detailed analysis to create a full 3D image of the building, ultimately helping them to understand its original purpose. Muon detectors are increasingly being used to understand the structures of ancient buildings without having to excavate and potentially damage the site. In 2017, Egypt, utilizing this method, announced they had discovered a vast chamber inside ancient Egypt's Great Pyramid of Giza. The Great Pyramid was built during the 4th dynasty between 2580 and 2560 BC, during the region of Pharaoh Khufu, who ruled the ancient civilizations for decades. The pyramid, which is 450 feet high and 750 feet wide, is known as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It is estimated to have taken tens of thousands of workers up to 20 years to build. No new rooms or passages have been confirmed inside the pyramid since the 1800s. Launched in October 2015 under the authority of the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities, Scan Pyramids is a project involving an international team of researchers. Its goal was to use particle physics to probe the internal structure of the pyramids in a non-invasive way. The technology works by using muons, popularly known as cosmic rays, to detect anomalies and voids within the pyramids. The researchers at Scan Pyramids say the void they have detected measures around 100 feet in length and 26 feet in height. It is located directly above the Grand Gallery, a 153-foot long room that connects the Queen's and King's chambers. The newly discovered chamber has a similar cross-section to the Grand Gallery, indicating that the two are connected. However, the research team are not yet able to pinpoint the precise orientation or shape of the chamber. We should be very cautious at this time in going too far beyond the observation of the void, because this void needs more research of any of its orientation and dimension in order to be able to conclude something more precise, said Hani Halal of the University of Cairo, the coordinator of the Scan Pyramids project. However, the announcement by Scan Pyramid has met with some skepticism within the Egyptology community. It is very clear what they found as a void doesn't mean anything at all. There are many voids in the pyramid because of construction reasons, said Zahi Hawass, an Egyptologist and former Egyptian Minister of Antiquities and Director of Excavations at Giza. He went on, "We have to always be very careful about the word void, because the Great Pyramid is filled with voids," he said. The builders of the pyramid set stones of various size and shape in its core, Hawass said, so the whole structure is riddled with gaps. The original designers of the pyramid also left sealed-off construction tunnels. Identifying these voids has more to do with publicity than with advancing knowledge of the pyramid. It has nothing to do with any secret rooms or anything inside the Great Pyramid. Kate Spence, senior lecturer in Egyptian archaeology at the University of Cambridge in the UK, told Newsweek that the chamber was more likely to be related to the construction of the pyramid rather than a hidden room full of treasure. What they seem to have found is a linear anomaly above a gallery, which is a very complex piece of construction in the center of the Great Pyramid. If you look at the cross-section of the pyramid above the King's Chamber, the main burial chamber, there are a whole series of little chambers which are roofed with incredibly heavy big granite blocks. My suspicion is what they are looking at is the remains of a constructional ramp which has been built within the pyramid, probably for getting those blocks into place, she said. The Scan Pyramid researchers have not been put off by the negative response to their work among academics, however. They believe that the structure of the newly discovered void should be studied in more detail. In a statement, Mehdi Tayoubi, the president of the organization Heritage Innovation Preservation and leader of the Scan Pyramids mission, said, "There are still many architectural hypotheses to consider. In particular, the big void could be made of one of several adjacent structures, or it could be inclined or horizontal. Overall, this discovery calls for more interdisciplinary collaborations to help understanding the pyramids and its construction process." In 2016, the same researcher group reported that they'd found void space behind the north face of the pyramid. On that occasion, the team of scientists appointed by the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities to oversee the work of the Scan Pyramids project team was not convinced that any sizable voids or cavities had been discovered. This oversight team was led by Zahi Hawass and included several Egyptologists with decades of experience, including Mark Lenner, who has been conducting work at Giza for about 30 years. Scan Pyramids issued its own press release through the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities, saying that more work needed to be done. Their researchers recommended extending the Scan Pyramids project by another year so that more data could be gathered. However, Hawass told Live Science that the results obtained by the Scan Pyramid team could be the result of different sized stones used in the construction of the Great Pyramid, rather than indicating the presence of voids of any size. The core of the pyramid has big and small stones, and this can show hollows everywhere, he said. Egypt's Antiquities Ministry decided to have a group of experienced Egyptologists oversee scanning work after a controversial incident which occurred a year earlier. Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves claims to have found evidence that the tomb of Queen Nefertiti was hidden behind a secret doorway in King Tutankhamun's tomb. Although an initial scan suggested that such a tomb may in fact exist, creating a media frenzy at the time, the idea met with skeptical reactions from Egyptologists not involved with Reeves' work. In the end, more detailed scans carried out the following year revealed that there was in fact no evidence for Nefertiti's tomb. An ancient sacred Mayan ritual site is opened for the first time in over 1,000 years. What the explorer discovers in there is so shocking, he seals the cave back up, destroys all records of his findings, and never speaks of it again, until now. In March 2019, Mexican archaeologists announced that they had discovered an extraordinary treasure trove of well-preserved Mayan artifacts under the ancient city of Chichen Itza in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The artifacts were found in a series of cave chambers called Balamkú, less than 2 miles from the famed pyramid known as the Temple of Kukulkan, which sits in the center of the site. Guillermo de Anda, an investigator with the National Institute of Anthropology and History, said that the remarkable discovery could help researchers rewrite the history of Chichen Itza, one of the Mayan civilization's greatest cities. It is built on top of a network of waterways, including sinkholes which the ancient Maya believed were sacred places that provided a portal to the underworld. The lead explorer spoke in detail about how he had to crawl through the tight tunnels of Balamkú for several hours before his headlamp illuminated something entirely unexpected. A cascade of offerings led by the ancient residents of Chichen Itza, so perfectly preserved and untouched that stalagmites had formed around the incense burners, vases, decorated plates, and other objects in the cavern. But what's most startling about this discovery is that this is not the first time this amazing site has been unearthed. Local residents and farmers had originally told the Mexican authorities about the existence of the cave over 5 decades ago. In 1966, Balamkú, which translates as the Cave of the Jaguar God, was visited by archaeologist Victor Segovia Pinto, who wrote up a report noting the presence of an extensive amount of archaeological material. But instead of excavating the site and removing the ancient treasures for analysis, Segovia instructed the local farmers to seal up the entrance, and all records of the contents of the cave seemed to vanish. He never spoke of his discovery again. So what was uncovered in the caves of Balamkú that the authorities were so keen to remain a secret? The answer to that is unlikely to be forthcoming, as investigators have said that they have only just begun to unearth this collection of Mayan artifacts. They advise that the site could take years to study due to the sheer number of richly decorated items on offer. However, they're confident that the knowledge they will gain from the contents within the Balamkú will profoundly change their ideas about the civilization that once dominated Central America. Around the year 900 BC, something new emerged out of the deep jungles and wilderness of what is now Guatemala and southern Mexico: the Mayan civilization. They were once one of the most advanced societies on Earth. The Mayans developed a written language long before any other culture in North America, and were known to have sophisticated mathematical, astronomical, and calendar systems. For the next 2,000 years, the Mayan civilization flourished at an astounding rate. They built huge and sprawling capitals, invested in farming and in trade, and became the most dominant force in the region, occupying an area from Mexico to El Salvador. They erected large temples and pyramids, creating huge cities supporting ever-increasing numbers of people. The population soared, with some estimates suggesting that at one time there were as many as 22 million Mayans, almost a quarter of the Earth's population at that time. During this period, The Mayans developed sophisticated forms of artwork and produced a great variety of architectural wonders, leaving a legacy which places them amongst the greatest civilizations of the pre-industrial age. And then suddenly, without warning, this advanced population just disappeared. The great Mayan cities were deserted, the artworks discarded, and the culture abandoned. To all intents and purposes, the Mayan people simply vanished. Which begs the question, what exactly could have happened to make them disappear almost overnight? Some experts think that the Maya were victims of a natural disaster, perhaps a massive earthquake or a volcanic eruption. However, the cities left behind by the Maya were intact. Whilst the ancient pyramids and temples were left to be consumed by the jungles, the buildings show no signs of any environmental catastrophe, which would explain the mass Mayan exodus. Other historians blame drought and famine. The Maya were good farmers, but as their population grew, it became harder to feed everyone. And so, the theory goes, they left their cities behind in search of food. Alternative research suggests that the Maya destroyed themselves, perhaps through civil war. But there are no records of such a conflict in the records they left behind, nor any explanation of why they left the region so abruptly. However, the mystery of the Mayans' demise is superseded only by the riddle of exactly where they originated from. For years, Mayan researchers have adhered to one of two theories. Some argue that the pre-Columbian culture developed virtually on its own, emerging fully formed from the depths of the jungle. Others believe they developed from other smaller civilizations in Central America at the time. However, neither explanation would explain how the Mayan were able to advance and progress so quickly. For years, archaeologists have been unable to determine how the Mayan became so much more skilled than their contemporary civilizations, particularly in mathematics, engineering, and most importantly, astronomy. Could the answer be that they had help from an extraterrestrial source? Throughout Mayan history, its rulers often claim to be descended from the stars, and numerous artifacts have been found which appear to depict alien beings and spacemen. In addition, the carvings upon one ancient ruler's tomb seem to illustrate the king within the cockpit of a spaceship, and inscriptions depict in detail his journey across the Milky Way. Whilst many mainstream historians have ruled out any connection to alien visitation, it remains a fact that in many areas across Central and South America, ancient markings, such as the Nazca lines in Peru, remain unexplained, and can only be seen in their entirety from several hundred feet above the Earth. Is this evidence that our ancient ancestors had access to flying machines? A number of researchers believe that the Mayans' huge temples, aligned with solar and lunar activity, were in fact some sort of ancient landing pads for spaceships, or a way of communicating with beings on other planets. It's interesting that the building of pyramids across the world, including in ancient Egypt, India, and China, seem to have occurred at roughly the same time, despite these civilizations having no contact with one another. And despite the building of pyramids being viewed as a predominantly Egyptian pastime, the Mayan built 10 times the number of pyramids that have been found in Egypt. Is it merely a coincidence that these disparate cultures all suddenly decided to start erecting huge monoliths and pyramids following the same constellations at exactly the same point in history? And why did these ancient societies appear to have such in-depth understanding of the solar system, including planets that would not be discovered for another 1,000 years? In 2012, a Mexican official released some never-before-seen Mayan artifacts, including statues, masks, plaques, and documents found in the inner networks of a temple in Mexico. And incredibly, he claimed that these artifacts confirmed without question that the Maya had contact with extraterrestrials. Even more astonishing, the official suggested that more evidence of aliens making contact with the Mayans existed within writing and codices found by historians, but that these are being suppressed by figures high up in the government. In recent years, hieroglyphs have been decoded to reveal that the Maya were able to accurately predict shifts in the Earth's axis every 26,000 years, and the ancient people believed that their rulers were direct descendants of beings from another world. Every Mayan city shows signs of astronomical influences in their construction. Recently translated codices have revealed the extent of the Mayans' understanding of the movement of the stars, and archaeologists have identified that many of the most important and symbolic Mayan buildings were aligned with planets or with the sun's transit. Indeed, several of the largest structures were observatories that had special windows inset into the walls, and each window corresponded to a specific celestial event. Interestingly, this adherence to the movements of the planets can also be seen in all the other great civilizations, including ancient Egypt, China, and the Celtics. But why were the Mayans observing the cosmos so intensely, and what exactly were they looking for? The earliest records of Mayan mythology tell stories of how the gods came down from the heavens to a barren and lifeless planet Earth. Here they created man, and the gods shared their sacred powers with early humans. However, they soon realized that they did not want to make man more powerful than themselves, and the gods stripped humans of these special gifts and made them mortal. One of the most important gods to the ancient Mayans was the serpent god Kukulkan. Legend tells that whilst he was sometimes a snake, Kukulkan could transform himself into a tall, blue-eyed white man with long hair who taught the Mayans the fundamentals of agriculture, science, and medicine. Having taught the Mayans all he knew, this man, who was almost European in his appearance, returned to the stars, leaving a prophecy that one day he would return. Could this explain the Mayans' obsession with all things celestial? Were they waiting for signs of their sacred god's return? Fascinatingly, the recently unearthed cave of Balamkú lies close to the site of the famed pyramid built to worship Kukulkan, and stories are already circulating about what is depicted on the newly discovered relics found within. Prominent astrophysicists argue that while many legends, artifacts, and purported out-of-place relics are cited in support of the ancient aliens idea, very few require more than a passing mention and can be easily explained. Yet, despite this, evidence of ancient cultures being visited by aliens continues to be unearthed around the world. Ancient cave drawings found in the Sahara appear to show beings wearing helmets and oxygen masks. In locations as disparate as Peru and the Italian Alps, archaeologists have observed ancient images of beings that seem to fly and creatures in what appear to be spaceships. Whilst the idea that aliens have visited our planet and that they communicated with our ancestors to teach them advanced technology has been dismissed by many historians, they haven't been able to provide an alternative logical answer for these bizarre images, and these experts have an even harder time explaining away the construction of awe-inspiring monuments that speckle the landscape of the globe. Earth is the home to dozens of incredible ancient constructions which have left modern scientists, historians, and engineers scratching their heads. These experts are unable to explain how ancient humans could have built gigantic and intricate structures without the use of cutting-edge crane and cutting technology. Some of the monuments, such as the famous pyramids and temples of the Mayans, are so intricate and complex that experts in the field of engineering are unable to replicate them using the most modern methods humanity has to offer. So could the truth about alien contact with the ancient Mayans finally be found amongst the newly unearthed treasures in the caves and tunnels of Balamkú? The contents of the cave have lain undisturbed for over a millennia, and no reason has ever been given as to why the site was sealed up over 50 years after this amazing treasure trove of artifacts was discovered. So, if further evidence of the Mayans' contact with extraterrestrials is revealed, could it finally convince the experts that aliens not only visited our ancient ancestors, but were also responsible for our very creation? A mysterious underground chamber has been discovered by archaeologists under the palace of Roman Emperor Nero. The secret vault has been kept hidden for almost 2,000 years, but what does it contain and what was it used for? Nero is perhaps the most famous of all Roman rulers and is seen as one of the villains of the ancient world. Emperor of Rome from AD 54 to AD 68, Nero's reign has been associated with extravagance, oppression, and brutality. Very few surviving ancient sources give favorable impressions of him, and he is said to have had his mother, adopted brother and first wife Octavia executed, and most famously of all, played his fiddle while the ancient city of Rome was burning to the ground. Some ancient sources blame the emperor himself for starting the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64, and then afterwards blaming the Christians for it. Although Nero has been reviled for hundreds of years, recent research has suggested that some of his bad reputation at least is down to what today is known as fake news. For example, archaeological evidence from the ancient city of Pompeii suggests that Nero was actually extremely popular among the common people. This is not hard to understand. The early years of Nero's rule were characterized by following a somewhat liberal policy. He allowed slaves to file complaints against their masters, frequently gave criminals clemency rather than sign their death warrants, banned capital punishment, helped cities that had suffered from disasters, and lowered taxes. But his alleged unpopularity may have stemmed from other sources. Nero was certainly more interested in the arts than he was in governing. This preoccupation didn't sit well with the powerful Roman Senate. According to historian Rebecca Benefiel, a professor of classics at Washington and Lee University in Virginia, Nero did not have the military triumphs that previous leaders had. Military processions brought revenue to the empire and celebrated the victories, power and prestige of Rome. With Nero, that wasn't happening as frequently. The emperor also devoted himself to his long-held artistic and literary interests, organizing poetry competitions and singing to the harp, at first only for a private audience, but later on, much to the alarm of the Senate, in public too. According to some sources, as Nero the emperor, no one was allowed to leave the audition during his performances. One historian mentions women giving birth during the Nero recitals and of men faking death in order to be carried out. On the night of July the 18th, AD 64, one of the worst disasters ever to hit the city of Rome occurred. Beginning in the southeastern part of the Circus Maximus, a large open-air venue used for public events, close to the Palatine and Kelkan Hills, a great fire ignited. Fanned by summer winds, the blaze spread through the shops filled with inflammable goods clustered in the area and rapidly onwards, destroying a vast swathe of the ancient city. First-century Roman historian Tacitus informs us that it was not until the fire had been raging for 6 days that it was brought under control. This was accomplished by demolishing numerous buildings and clearing a vast area of open land, thus leaving nothing to feed the fire. Although Nero had been blamed for starting the fire himself, it's unlikely that he was involved. Indeed, much of his own property was destroyed in the disastrous blaze, including a large part of his own palace. According to Tacitus, upon hearing news of the fire, Nero rushed to Rome and immediately organized a relief effort, which included a team of firefighters and food and shelter for the survivors of the blaze. The emperor also began an ambitious rebuilding project for the city, which included widening the roads, reducing the height of tenement blocks, and the construction of his new villa complex. If the emperor had no involvement in the fire, which it seems he didn't, he certainly took advantage of its effects. After the last embers had died down between AD 65 and 68, he used the newly created space left empty by the Inferno to build his Domus Orca, Nero's Golden Palace. Parts of the vast palace were first rediscovered in the 15th century and were visited by Renaissance artists, including Raphael. Some of the more daring managed to slide down on rope ladders and push themselves through a hole in the ceiling of what they believed were caves or grottos to find the rooms of the old palace, walls still adorned with paintings. They gazed upon the magnificently painted frescoes which would inspire their own works. Indeed, the Renaissance saw a huge reawakening of interest in long-forgotten classical Rome. The Golden Palace has always been an extravagant curiosity, as it is completely different to most other royal palaces. According to the former archaeological superintendent of Rome, the Domus Aurea represents an attempt to import the refined architecture of Alexandria to Rome and to give the city the appearance of a lavish eastern capital, which it would take on in the following centuries. Nero's creation had a huge golden dome, contained an incredible 300 rooms, occupied about 124 acres between the hills of the Palatine and the Esquiline, with a total of 25 times that of the Colosseum. The buildings had ceilings decorated with semi-precious stones and finished in ivory, priceless mosaics, pools and fountains, and an artificial lake. It also had vineyards, cornfields, and woods filled with various kinds of wild and domestic animals. The palace seems to have been used exclusively for parties. None of its 300 rooms were used as bedrooms, and puzzlingly, no kitchens or bathrooms have as yet been discovered. According to Roman historian Suetonius, one particularly extravagant feature of the palace was a revolving dining room. There was a circular banquet hall which revolved incessantly day and night, like the heavens, he wrote. The entrance hall of the villa was so large that it was able to contain a colossal statue 120 feet high of Nero, and it was so extensive that it had 3 colonnades a mile long. The gardens full of masterpieces of sculpture from Greece and Asia Minor, modern Turkey. But Nero didn't get to enjoy the luxuries of the Golden Palace for very long. In the months after the construction of the palace, which was never properly finished, Nero's rule as emperor soon began to crumble. In AD 65, he was alleged to have kicked his pregnant wife Poppaea to death, though it is just as likely that she died in childbirth. In AD 68, faced with the revolt from the Gallic and Spanish legions, along with the Praetorian Guards, Nero fled Rome. The Senate declared him a public enemy, and facing execution on the 9th of June AD 68, he committed suicide with an iron blade. Incredibly, within 40 years, Nero's magnificent palace had disappeared. The lavishness of the vast building complex had long been deeply resented by Roman officials. Nero's successors were quick to strip the palace of many of its valuables and put large parts of the palace to public use or to construct other buildings on the land. In AD 70, the vaulted spaces of the palace were filled with earth to provide a level surface upon which to construct the massive public baths of the emperors Titus and Trajan. One of the palace's main features, a large man-made lake, was covered up by the Flavian amphitheatre, better known today as the Roman Colosseum. In fact, the Colosseum acquired its name from the giant bronze statue in the entrance hall that Nero had commissioned of himself to resemble the Colossus at Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. One of the reasons of this was that due to the lake's infrastructure, the bottom of the Colosseum would occasionally be purposely flooded in order to allow mock naval battles to be enacted on the water. Now included as part of Rome's archaeological park of the Colosseum, the excavation and restoration of Nero's incredible Golden Palace has been an ongoing process for years. Although the odd surprise is not unexpected inside such a vast complex, recently archaeologists found something they were not prepared for, a previously unknown chamber. In a statement, director of the archaeological park of the Colosseum, Alfonsino Rosso, said, "The discovery of this room is part of the scientific research strategy that the park carries out every day, together with the safety and restoration interventions. In the dark for almost 20 centuries, the Sala della Finge, the Sphinx Room as we have called it, tells us about the atmosphere of the years in the Principality of Nero. The Sphinx Room was found accidentally when archaeologists were beginning restoration of a neighbouring vault. The newly discovered room's curved ceilings are 15 feet high and are richly decorated with murals of real and mythical creatures, including a sphinx standing above a sacred stone, a centaur, the goat pod Pan, musical instruments, and a scene of a sword-wielding man being attacked by a panther. The room is painted in rich red, green and yellow pigments, which have survived the last 2,000 years or so remarkably well. Again, a white background can be seen, red-edged squares, finessed with yellow ochre lines and golden bands, punctuated by a dense series of floral elements, archaeologists said. Much of the room is still filled with soil, covering large parts of the walls and probably sections of the mural. However, any future excavations will have to be carefully managed, as removing the soil could destabilize the entire structure of the chamber. Although archaeologists are not certain what the vault was used for, they are sure of one thing: more fascinating and perhaps unexpected discoveries in the chamber lie ahead when further investigation gets underway. "We hope to finish the work by the end of the year," said Professor Russo. "The room is well preserved, but it needs cleaning and restoration." 1985 was a remarkable year for Jörg Eckstein when he purchased a property in Buenos Aires with the intention of turning it into a business opportunity. Being a long-time resident of the historical San Telmo neighborhood, he was very familiar with the area and treasured the idea of transforming an abandoned mansion into a thriving restaurant. Prepared for the amount of work, time and money that would have to go into making his dream come true, what he was not prepared for was what he would stumble upon: one of the most important and unusual archaeological discoveries that would go down in history and change his life forever. This beautiful and very grand old colonial-style building was constructed in 1830 and was called what the Argentinians refer to as a casa chorizo, so named because the rooms of the house are lined up in a row like a string of sausages, opening onto a series of side patios onto a courtyard. The walls were crumbling, there was structural damage, and the floors were covered in debris, but undeterred, Eckstein began to renovate the dilapidated mansion. Work commenced, but it wasn't long before unexpected problems began to arise when he noticed something unusual about the foundations of the house. It wasn't long before one of the patios began sinking. It was then and there that Eckstein unearthed a portal to a vast network of tunnels beneath his feet. After this discovery, a swarm of archaeologists descended on the 20-room mansion to learn more about the history of the uncovered labyrinth. Tales of a mysterious underground world had long been told in Buenos Aires, and according to the coordinator at the city's Interpretive Center for Archaeology and Paleontology, Riccardo Orsini, the old myths about the existence of a great swarm of tunnels under the city came back to life again and again. The mansion was abandoned in the late 1800s when fear gripped the nation with the onslaught of a breakout of yellow fever that swept through the Argentinian city. In the early 1900s, it was used as tenement housing, but sadly by the 1980s it was empty once again. Whole rebuilds were suspended in order to preserve history, and Eckstein stated that because it revealed not only the past that appears on the surface, but the past that existed under all the buildings. Under the house, the archaeological dig revealed a curious, vaulted construction where further investigations exposed the roof of an underground tunnel. What was the purpose of this tunnel, and where did it lead to? When the experts explored further, they uncovered more subterranean passageways almost 2 kilometers long. It seems that the old mansion was resting on top of a complex drainage system. Further research revealed that residents of the neighborhood had built the tunnels in around 1780 to prevent flooding from a stream when it rained. The intention was to divert the flow of muddy, silted water that would have also been contaminated by animal waste belonging to farms on the outskirts of the city. Some of San Telmo's elderly residents were unsurprised by the discovery, as several of Eckstein's neighbors remembered when some of the dried-out tunnels were still accessible. They could not, however, give any clue as to when and why they were closed off. Today, the mansion has a completely new purpose that it was originally intended for. It is now a museum and has earned its place in history. This museum is now the entrance to the reconditioned tunnels and displays the many objects that were found during the excavation. The tunnels have been restored to their former glory, and once inside, illuminations show the splendor of the broad passageways now lined with the original bricks exposed. The romantic atmosphere these lights convey seem to almost conceal the practical purpose they'd had in the past. San Telmo is the oldest part of the original settlement of Buenos Aires, as it was founded in 1536, and it seems that it is also where many of the city's underground tunnels are situated. Not all of the tunnels were built for drainage purposes, It seems as over 100 years before their construction, Jesuit priests were actively working on another set of tunnels. In the late 1500s, a Spanish Jesuit order intent on spreading Christianity to the world settled in Buenos Aires. They ingrained themselves in the community by establishing a mission which held a church, a library, a museum, and even had a pharmacy. This historical mission is known today as the Block of Enlightenment. Even with all their good deeds, the Jesuits were not exactly welcome in the community. The region's indigenous population strongly objected and resisted all attempts by the men of God in their quest to convert them to Christianity. With confrontation a daily reality for the Jesuits, fear was always at the forefront for the holy men. So they took steps to ensure their safe passage should things get too dangerous. According to research done by the leading archaeologist of the dig, the tunnels beneath the mission were probably only one part of a much larger but incomplete plan, which would, if finished, have connected the mission to the city's churches in order to allow priests and the converted to escape with their lives. Experts still don't know the extent of the Jesuits' network. Failing in their mission to convert the indigenous people, the Jesuits abandoned in 1767 and headed inland to try their luck establishing other missions near the border with Paraguay. The Spanish settlers that remained used the mission and its buildings and established the Royal College of San Carlos and Argentina's first national library. Neither the college nor the library is there anymore, and unfortunately there is very little documentation, and there were no plans for blueprints left behind by the Jesuits, as the underground escape route was meant to be a secret for the sake of security. The tunnels under the mission remained undiscovered for almost 150 years, until renovations inside the museum on an architectural school operating inside the complex began in 1912. Workmen were startled when the floor started giving way underneath their feet. Further investigation revealed the tunnels below, and the project changed course to restore and protect them. Presently, there is a small section of the tunnel that is accessible to the public on a guided tour, but the narrow stone passageway the Jesuit priests created seems pale in comparison to the spacious and well-lit tunnels beneath the museum. Visitors of the mission tunnels have to navigate their way in stooping in single file through the dimly lit and low arch ceilings. There are many theories about the tunnels beneath the museums, and some believe they were once part of a more extensive passage system, but there is no proof to back up this theory. If ever it was the case that a larger network did indeed exist, then time and age have consumed any possible evidence. Construction crews working on other projects, for example the expansion of the subway, over the last number of decades, have uncovered and broken through subterranean structures that could possibly have been part of this theorized network. Unfortunately for the annals of history, investigations into these architectural structures didn't happen. Politics and legalities protecting progress and development prevented the protection and preservation of the archaeological heritage of Buenos Aires. And although a remedial law that was passed in 2003 helped, the archaeological losses that they have suffered are irreversible. The public will continue to be fascinated by the mysteries surrounding the tunnels, and now and again, the news still features stories of those that may be undiscovered to this day. There is always an opportunity for urban archaeologists landing on a site whenever there is a new development or construction dig, and while one cannot just randomly pounce on new broken earth and start digging, there is always the chance to discover something from the past. When a new parking lot was built in Paris in the 70s, medieval and post-medieval artifacts were unearthed, and the castle of the Charles V was discovered beneath the building site, and the Louvre Museum used it in its construction. These are examples of the possibilities. While archaeology is the study of human history, and the academics look at this for answers, we should also rely on the stories and recollections of our elders. These accounts can be a most reliable source most of the time. Elderly resident Anastasio exclaimed he always knew about the tunnels beneath the museum and played in them as a child. When they were discovered, he said, "They finally found them," he exclaimed excitedly. A few years ago, when officials in Turkey went to investigate flooding in the Nevşehir province, they uncovered a vast, massive network of underground tunnels. Recent research has revealed that these tunnels from a subterranean city may date back 5,000 years. The massive web of man-made tunnels and caverns extends 3 miles underground and contains 3 stories of homes, places of worship, and areas for mass congregation. It's now believed to be the biggest underground city ever built. Fascinatingly, it is only one of perhaps 200 mysterious underground cities in the Cappadocia region of Turkey. The discovery. Recently, an announcement was made in the media that shocked the archaeological world. The world's oldest underground city had been discovered in Turkey, partly submerged underwater. The discovery of the ancient city was made in the province of Nevşehir in Cappadocia, a semi-arid region of central Turkey. It took place when around 1,500 houses in 11 neighborhoods around an ancient Byzantine citadel in central Nevşehir were being demolished by the Housing Development Administration, TOKİ, to start a new urban project. The director of TOKİ, Mehmet Ergun Turan, said, "We stopped the construction we were planning to do on these areas when an underground city was discovered." Initial examination found roughly 4.3 miles long underground city of 3 floors, consisting of houses, tunnels, churches, wine cellars, food storage areas and galleries. The mayor of Nevşehir, Hazar Unver, commented on the huge importance of the find. He said, "The underground city was found in the 45 hectares of the local 75-hectare area that is within the Urban Transformation Project. We applied to the Cultural and Natural Heritage Preservation Board and the area was officially registered. It has a 7-kilometer road dotted with churches, galleries and other structures. It's estimated that the city dates back to the era of the Hittites, similar to other underground cities. We are now working to make it open for visitors. We will build walking platforms inside and a large park will be built on the surface. The other underground cities in Nevşehir's various districts do not even amount to the kitchen of this new underground city." Realizing the immense importance of the discovery of the Nevşehir city, authorities abruptly halted the housing project and called in archaeologists and geophysicists who began investigating on the site. Özgen Kakia, an associate professor at the Çanakkale 18th March University, who was involved in the excavations, believed that the tunnels at the site were used to carry agricultural products. He said, "We believe that people who were engaged in agriculture were using the tunnels to carry agricultural products to the city. We also estimate that one of the tunnels passes under Nevşehir and reaches a faraway water source." Indeed, most academics believe that the huge network of underground houses and tunnels was home to thousands of people who were part of a farming community that existed around 3000 BC. Local folklore talks of an underground city in the area which people call Giza, which translates into English as enter and see. Geophysicists from Nevşehir University conducted a detailed survey of the site and found it to cover almost 5 million square feet. The survey also suggests that the underground corridors may reach down as deep as 371 feet, which would make it the largest of all underground cities. Mayor Hasan Unver commented on the results of the extensive archaeological work being carried out at the site. He said, "We have reached 7-kilometer-long galleries, unearthed a normal living space, as well as a 12th century rock-carved church, a 6th century monastery, and mosque-like religious places, which date back to the Seljuk era. We've also found horse barns where military horses had been cared for. In addition, we found 4 oil houses and hundreds of tobacco pipes made of meerschaum. Everything here is under our control." The newly discovered site at Nevşehir lies beneath the Byzantine-era hilltop castle in an area which is home to countless subterranean settlements of varying sizes and possibly of varying dates as well. Derinkuyu. The largest of these is in the Derinkuyu district, just over 18 miles from Nevşehir, and goes down to a depth of approximately 197 feet, equal to the height of an 8th-story building, and large enough to accommodate around 20,000 people. The massive underground city has thousands of ventilation shafts and water channels which provided fresh air and water to each level of the site. Derinkuyu was probably first established around the 7th or 8th century BC, most likely as protection against invading forces. The city was protected by doors which consisted of massive stone wheels that could be rolled into place to block an entrance. One of Derinkuyu's most interesting features is a large room with vaulted ceilings, which is believed to have been a religious school with a separate study room. Derinkuyu was also connected to other underground cities in the region through a sophisticated network of tunnels. These enigmatic underground cities in Cappadocia were carved into the soft volcanic rock thousands of years ago. But as stone is non-organic, it's difficult to accurately date these cities. They may have been originated during the Hittite period from 1600 to 1200 BC, or even earlier. They're often attributed to the Phrygians, an ancient people of west-central Anatolia, whose most famous king was Midas of the Golden Touch. The state of Phrygia arose in the region in the 8th century BC. Since ancient times, Turkey has been a major trade hub between Asia and Europe, and thus has been invaded and conquered repeatedly by different peoples over thousands of years. Consequently, the purpose of these underground cities is usually connected with concealment from invaders. The most active period of inhabitation of these subterranean worlds was during the Byzantine period from 395 AD to 1453 AD, when regular invasions by foreign armies forced locals to hide underground. Many of these cities continued in use right up until the 20th century, when people hid there to save themselves from persecution during the Ottoman Empire. In fact, it was not until 1923, after the population exchange between Greece and Turkey, that these underground cities were finally abandoned and not rediscovered until 1963. At the moment, Derinkuyu is the largest excavated underground city in the world, but many believe that when Nevşehir is fully excavated, that title may well change hands. Makli. There are a staggering 200 or more underground towns and cities in Cappadocia, many of which are wholly or partly open to the public. One of the best known of them is Makli underground town, located about 12 miles from Nevşehir and built under the hill known as the Citadel of Makli. It's connected to Derinkuyu by miles of ancient tunnels and was open to visitors as early as 1964. The subterranean town consists of 8 floors, 4 of which are open to the public today. The spaces in the underground town, which are organized around ventilation shafts, were made into stables, storage rooms, wineries, and kitchens. Archaeologists believe this underground village could have been a temporary home for up to 3,500 people. On the 3rd level of the settlement, archaeologists discovered an unusual block of andesite, which was used by the ancient inhabitants for cold-forming copper. The ancient name of the town was Enigup, and experts believe construction may have begun by the Phrygians in the 8th to 7th centuries BC. It was used much later in the Byzantine era for protection against Muslim Arabs during the Arab-Byzantine Wars of 780 to 1180 AD. The modern village on the site is built almost around 100 tunnels of the underground city. These tunnels are still used today by the villagers as storage areas, stables and cellars, accessed via the courtyards of the houses in the village. There is actually an astonishing eyewitness account of these underground Cappadocian cities, which gives us a vivid idea of what they must have been like. It was written in 370 BC by the ancient Greek professional soldier and writer Xenophon, and tells of the expedition of a large army of Greek mercenaries hired by Persian Prince Cyrus the Younger to help him seize the throne of Persia from his brother. During their travels, they came upon a strange village somewhere in Anatolia, modern Turkey, which Xenophon describes as follows. The houses were underground, with a mouth like that of a well, but spacious below, and while entrances were tunneled down for the beasts of burden, the human inhabitants descended by ladder. In the houses were goats, sheep, cattle, fowl, and their young, and all the animals were reared and took their fodder there in the houses. Here were also wheat, barley and beans, and barley wine in large bowls. Floating on the top of this drink were the barley grains, and in it were straws, some larger and others smaller, without joints, and when one was thirsty, one had to take these straws into his mouth and suck. It was an extremely strong drink unless one diluted it with water, and extremely good when one was used to it. Discovery of the biggest stone sphere in the world. Ancient civilization researcher Dr. Sam Osmanagic, PhD, has been exploring the phenomenon of prehistoric stone spears for 2 decades all over the world. He has visited sites in southern Costa Rica, western Mexico, on Easter Island, Turkey, the island of Isla del Cano in the Pacific, Tunisia, and the Canary Islands on several occasions. There are also some in Antarctica, New Zealand, Russia, Egypt, USA, Argentina. In the Balkans, he wrote about the stone spheres from northern Albania, the Dalmatian hinterland in Croatia, west and southwest Serbia. The story started about them when they were first discovered in the Dequist Delta of Costa Rica. Since the 1930s, hundreds of stone balls have been documented, ranging in size from a few centimeters to over 2 meters in diameter. Some weigh 20 tons. Almost all of them are made of granodiorite, very hard igneous stone. No doubt they were made by intelligent hands. When Dr. Sam established the Archaeological Park, Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun Foundation in Sarajevo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, he had formed the team for the systematic studies of this phenomenon. After the first decade, they have found them at 20 different locations, 8 shaped granite spheres in the village Tiokac near the northeastern city of Tuzla, volcanic stone spheres near Konjic in the central part of Bosnia, and those built of sandstone in other villages near the northwestern city of Banja Luka, and then in the towns of Verez, Zenica, Bihać, Zeps and elsewhere. The largest site is near the central Bosnian town of Zevid od Visaj in the area known as Deboki Potok, Deep Water Stram, where once there were 80 spheres. Some ended up lower down in the river Bosnia, and most were broken up by the local residents in search of treasure that they never found. Part of them decorate private properties, but 8 are still preserved stone spheres, and they're lying in the creek. In September 2006, at the initiative of the Foundation, Archaeological Park Bosnian Stone Spheres was established, which was converted into a tourist attraction. It regularly receives visitors from all over the world. In 2007, Professor Mohamed Pasik from the University of Zenica took 4 samples of damaged stone spheres in Zevid od Visaj and the sample of natural rock material and analyzed them at the Institute for Materials in Zenica. Physical, chemical analyses showed the presence of the same 9 elements in the same proportion in the spheres and natural rocks. However, the difference was that the spheres also contained manganese, which is used to improve strength, and calcium oxide, the basis for the binder material. The conclusion is that the ancient civilization melted natural stone and added additives to improve the quality, poured it into molds and built very hard stone spheres. In early March 2016, the Foundation's team started digging stone spheres in a village of Podubravia on the outskirts of Zevid od Visaj. Dr. Sam visited that location on March 19, 2016 with several media and a group of tourists from 13 countries. This stone sphere had a surface of less than 1 square meter, peering out of the ground for decades. Older residents of the area knew of its existence. However, recent excavations have been started by several enthusiasts. Excavation has been slow because of the deposited earth, hand tools, and the desire to avoid damaging the sphere. After 10 days of digging, it became clear that this was a megalithic-sized ball. On the 19th of March, the excavated part was measured, which was slightly less than half the volume of the stone ball. The result, 3.8 meters. The circumference was probably between 8 and 9 meters. From there, one can get the radius, which is between 120 and 150 meters. To determine the mass, it's necessary to determine the density, and for that one needs to analyze materials that are present in the ball. What's obvious is the brown-red color of the ball indicates a high concentration of iron. Assuming the density is between the density of lime and iron, it could amount to about 5 kilograms per square centimeter. In this case, two preliminary values for the radius and density could be calculated and can determine the mass. The first projection, it was more than 30 tons. In Europe at that moment, there was no stone sphere with more mass than the recently excavated sphere in Podobravia. Above the sphere, there was a sandstone layer, then a layer of clay, soil and vegetation. This testifies to the enormous age of the ball, above which natural materials sedimentation occurred for tens and perhaps hundreds of thousands of years. The largest stone sphere is in Costa Rica and weighs 20 tons. Only when the Bosnian stone sphere is completely cleaned, the exact radius will be known. Also, when the structure of the material is analyzed, it would be known whether this is the most massive stone sphere in the world. If it is made of cast iron, the answer would be a definite yes. So what would that mean? Well, first, that the territory of southern Europe, the Balkans and Bosnia and Herzegovina was the location of a very ancient advanced civilization about which there is no other trace. Secondly, that they knew technology quite different from ours. And third, they used a powerful geometrical shapes, sphere, and an energy-potent material, electromagnetism of iron, above the energy-potent points, the water movement and release of negative ions. This brings us to a possible purpose of these stone spheres. Several skilled dowsers measured the impact of the energy of the stone sphere on the bioenergetic field of visitors. Extension of the aura was recorded and thereby increase immunity. It seemed that the ancient ancestors had better knowledge of the energy of the planet and lived in harmony with it. The discovery of the new stone spheres in Shin-Au-Av in March 2016 sensationally echoed throughout the world. At the Archaeological Park Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun Foundation, it's organized a wide media campaign for the presentation of the prehistoric phenomenon. The foundation addressed several million recipients of emails it has in its database, including numerous world media. Once again, they spoke of the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina as the site of an ancient civilization, much older than the conventional vision of human history. The samples were sent to universities in Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and these are the analyses that were obtained. Geologist Miodrag Jojovic from Belgrade has done petrographic, macroscopic and microscopic analysis of the sample stone spheres, concluding that the texture is massive with the presence of quartz, muscovite, iron oxide, magnetite and a carbonate base, basalt cement. Presence of energy-active elements is therefore obvious. The Mining, Construction and Geology faculty of the University of Tuzla determined the particle density, that's the ratio of the mass of particles to its volume, and the Master of Geology Muzdin Hodzik signed a report in which he determined the value of the density to be 2.64 grams per square meter. The volume of the stone spheres is equal to the value of 14.14 square meters. Mass in kilograms was then simply determined by multiplying density, the specific weight, and volume. The weight of the stone sphere at Shin-Au-Av is 37.32 tons. Large stone spheres of granodiorite Dr. Sam saw in Costa Rica were reaching 20 tons. In western Mexico, near the small town of Ajoalco at the location Piedras Bolas, volcanic stone spheres reached 30 tons. The measurements of the stone sphere in Shin-Au-Av and the comparison with the biggest spheres in Central America confirm that the Bosnian stone sphere is the most massive and largest in the world.
The legends, myths and literature of mankind have always been filled with fanciful or terrifying accounts of underground lands and races hidden from surface sight. Rumours of a largely unseen reality of cavern worlds, hidden tunnel systems which crisscross the globe, and the occasional accidental discovery of a large geode structure within the Earth have migrated from the realms of folklore and early scientific speculation into literature, and perhaps back into folklore again. When reading and studying the available fiction which touches upon the topic of a subterranean world, many similarities come to light. This is interesting insofar as the various writers were not necessarily familiar with one another's works. It is obvious that many of them drew upon folk tales and mythology, as well as the latest scientific findings and theories of the day. Indeed, they had a huge matrix of archetypes and forms with which to work. Religious traditions have also been a major influence on the development of fiction about subterranean worlds and inhabitants, and some brave souls have shared accounts of what they believe to be their own encounters with creatures that dwell within the Earth's crust. One of the earliest examples of subterranean stories is to be found in the Gilgamesh cycle of stories, which some would say is not so much fictitious as it is a distorted account of ancient events. Gilgamesh was an actual king who ruled Uruk, also called Unug, about 2600 BC, and he was supposedly of half-divine origin. Like other heroes of ancient mythic cycles who were demigods or semi-divine, Gilgamesh longed for immortality. In one tale from his cycle, he befriends a physically powerful, hairy, subhuman character named Enkidu, and teaches him the customs of humanity. In a later tale, Enkidu, on behalf of his friend and king, agrees to venture into the underworld of ancient Mesopotamia to search for someone who has the secret of immortality. Other Sumerian accounts leave little doubt that the Ker or Kigal, the Great Below, was a place of immense size and great terror. The Kigal was said to be filled with a wide range of beings, including spirits and the undead, reanimated bodies of human beings, as well as savage guardians called scorpion men. Other residents were described as sexless and robotic artificial beings, called Galatur or Gala, who were used by the rulers of the underworld for missions of kidnapping human beings from the surface world or for other errands. Also present in the underworld were the Ataku, eagle-headed reptilian humanoids, who are probably the original jinn and ifrits of the ancient Middle East. Another strange race was the Pazuzu, a canine-faced humanoid monstrosity with reptilian scales and tail. All of these motifs, which in one form or another have been found to permeate nearly every ancient underworld tradition, and also have found their way into folklore and literature. The Asian region, particularly the Indian subcontinent, Tibet, Nepal, China and Japan, has very similar traditions about subterranean inhabitants. In India, there is still a strong belief in the reality of the Nagas, a race of serpent people, or lizard men, who have made their homes in two major underground cities or civilizations, Bhogavati and Patala. The Nagas are believed to have an affinity with water, and the entrances to their underground palaces are said to be hidden often at the bottom of wells, deep lakes and rivers. They are described as a very advanced race or species with a highly developed technology. The Nagas are also believed to harbour a disdain for human beings, whom they are said to abduct, torture, interbreed with and even eat. The interbreeding has supposedly led to a wide variety of forms, ranging from completely reptilian to nearly human in appearance. The Naga race is related to another underworld race, the Hindu demons, or Rakshasas. In China, the Lung Wang, dragon kings, closely resemble the Nagas in many respects. The Lung were said to dwell either in the celestial realm, i.e. the stars and planets, or beneath the surface of the earth. They too were said to possess a magical pearl in their forehead, a mystical or divine eye or source of power. Like the Nagas, some of the entrances to their palaces or kingdoms could be found beneath lakes and rivers or behind waterfalls. Almost always such entrances were well hidden from the intrusive eyes or feet of mortal men and women. One such entrance to the Chinese underworld was said to be in the eastern mountain of Taishan near Khufu province. This entrance to the Chinese hell was guarded by savage demons called Men Shen, often depicted as warriors wearing fierce, animalistic masks or faces. There was also interaction between the Lords of Hell, as they were known, and the Dragon Kings. The 4 Hell Kings, called Yan Luo or Yan Wang, possibly derived from the Hindu death god Yama, ruled over a vast region consisting of 18 levels or locales. In one tale, a Dragon King is robbed by an extremely clever and human-like monkey, who is similar in many respects to the Hindu Hanuman, who in turn came into conflict with the Rakshasas of the underworld in the Ramayana. The Dragon King calls on the help of Yan Luo, who are in turn bested by Monkey as well. The Japanese hell is even more of an amalgam of different traditions, as it incorporates Chinese, Hindu and Buddhist characteristics into an earlier animistic Shinto system. Other beings are the Kappa, a semi-aquatic and totally reptilian-looking humanoid dwarf, the ugly girls of hell, and sundry other shape-shifting entities who dwell underground or under houses. The fox people are among the latter, often taking human form and delighting in abduction and seduction of mortals. The underworld of ancient Egypt has many things in common with its Mesopotamian counterpart. Called the Tuat or Duat, it was ruled by the god of the dead, Osiris, the counterpart of Sumer's Nagal. It is the servants of Osiris, however, who are of concern here. There was the jackal-headed god Khenti-Mentiu, and also Anubis, both gods of arcane knowledge, embalming and other sciences. The god of knowledge, Thoth, was also a regular in the Tuat. He had a humanoid form with the head of a baboon, but very canine in appearance. All 3 of these deities bear a strong resemblance to the Sumerian Pazuzu. There is also a parallel in the Ushabtu, originally conceived as artificial, animated and robotic servants who were very similar to the Gala or Galatur of the Sumerian underworld. Like the Gala, the Ushabtu could be dispatched to punish or abduct an ordinary mortal or even the pharaoh himself. These beings were represented in Egyptian burials by small statues of the same name, mimicking the supernatural servants of Osiris and hopefully providing a retinue of retainers and slaves for the deceased. Another being with familiar characteristics was Amut, a blend of crocodile, lion and dog. But possibly the most feared being to haunt the underworld was the god of chaos and strife, Set or Seth, who attempted to mount a coup d'etat against his brother Osiris. The hugest dragon of the Tuat, however, was the gigantic serpent Apophis, very similar to Nidhogger or Jumungand from the Norse underworlds, a monstrous serpent who brought fear even to the gods. Moving into Europe and Scandinavia, the mythical Subterraneans became less distant and more immediate, interacting with the common folk on a much more regular basis. Scandinavians had their trolls and giants or Jotuns, also called Etins, who were great granitic beings of immense physical power and sometimes hairy of form. More mysterious were the dwarves, a race or races of stunted, powerful craftsmen and weapons-smiths. One race of dwarves was from Svartalfheim, the land of the Dark Elves, a cavern world in its own right. Some of the Svartalf dwarf kind lived in Niflheim, the land of the dead. Along with the savage and man-eating trolls, the dwarves would turn to stone, into toads or otherwise die if struck by the direct rays of the sun. Like the trolls and dwarves, the elves seem to dislike bright sunlight, but may have had more tolerance than their troll and dwarf cousins, as they were sometimes seen at dawn, twilight or dusk, or by day in deeply shadowed valleys or mountain chasms. The elves took a regular interest in human affairs, weddings, births and deaths, bloodlines, the success of crops and livestock and so forth, but only for their own selfish interests. They seemed to be overly concerned with genetic and biological diversity, and they pilfered livestock, crops and human genes via theft or cross-species liaison whenever they saw fit to do so. The elves are generally depicted as extremely fair-haired and fair-skinned. Dragons were also said to live deep in the earth, as recounted in the Anglo-Saxon Germanic saga of Beowulf. The monster Grendel was a hairy, scaled fiend, a Naga troll which later British traditions would call a goblin, and modern cryptozoologists would term a hairy humanoid. Dragons were the special guardians of buried treasure, that is, buried knowledge or technology, much of it often made by the powers of the subterranean dwarves. The European dragon had a nastier disposition than his Oriental counterpart, or perhaps he came into conflict with a group of people who entertained different philosophical ideals when it came to living in fear of man-eating entities. But whatever the case, like his eastern cousins, he had a relationship with both underground caverns and deep bodies of water. England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland have rich traditions of under-earth dwellers, with many similarities or even common origins between them, like the Norse Germanic variants, the fairies, goblins, trolls, knockers, brownies, leprechauns, she, Tuluath Teg, and numerous other categories of humanoid beings, were fair or foul, malevolent or kind, actually indifferent, making their homes almost without exception beneath the ground. Mounds, hills, ruins, ancient raths and hill forts, mountains, cliffs, and even cities of great age were said to serve as the rooftops of their palaces. Like the Nagas and dragons, some had the entrances to their subterranean homes at the bottom of lakes. To remove all doubt as to their relationship with Norse hidden folk and Indian Nagas alike, they shunned the sunlight and often seemed interested in crossbreeding their own bloodlines with those of human beings, or even in crossbreeding their livestock or fairy cattle, horses, hounds, and so forth, with the surface species which were most compatible. The goblin dwarf Rumpelstiltskin, in his lust to have the human baby and its genetic bounty, is another example of this in German folklore. Of particular interest are the Tuatha De Danann of Ireland, the people of the goddess Danu, also called the She. Originally an aristocratic warrior race of heroic proportion, they dwindled in size after retreating underground to become the Daoine She, Thena She, or diminutive fairies of Irish folklore. Most of the gentry or aristocratic trooping fairies are said to be of this type. Like the Scandinavian elves, they are depicted as particularly fair of complexion and hair. According to Lady Wilde in Ancient Legends of Ireland, Ward and Downey, London 1887, they are categorized as cave fairies. In addition to their now familiar practice of abduction of and hybridization with surface humans, their name Tuatha, tribe or people, De Danann, holds a strong resemblance to the Egyptian name for the underworld, the Tuat. It is generally thought that the term fairy or faerie has its origin in the earlier French term fée or the Latin fatae, but the possibility of an older origin, as hinted at by the Tuat-Tuatha connection, may in fact bear further examination. For did not the pharaohs believe that they would journey through the Tuat on the way to their places in eternity? The hills and glens of Ireland are also said to hide the remnants of at least 3 vanquished races: the Firbolgs, the Fomorians, and the Numidians. All are the ancient enemies of the Tuatha De Danann, and were driven underground by the latter in the distant past, where they then dwindled in size, lack of genetic diversity, at an even earlier time than did their conquerors. The Fomors and the Firbolgs are probably the origin race of many of the bogies and bukas, goblins and hobgoblins, Scottish trolls, and other malevolent, sometimes shape-shifting beings which seem to bear strong resemblance to the Scandinavian trolls, being perhaps a smaller variant. The etymological connection between trolls and trolls is obvious, and reflects the sequence of both legendary and historical migrations to the British Isles. Each group of fairies and goblins can be viewed as the dethroned, exiled gods of an earlier defeated human culture. The question is, what or who were these gods, which still exist in popular imagination today? Were they symbolic pantheons or archetypes, or living beings who predated man on this planet? The New World Native American cultures have similar beliefs in an extensive layered realm of caverns which is hidden beneath their feet. This murky world is believed to be inhabited by both human and humanoid beings, and by a variety of monsters and demons. The Mescalero Apache have many of these beliefs. One of their oldest sacred traditions state that they came from the old Red Fire land before the Great Flood. This land is said to have been in the distant eastern Atlantic Sea, but was destroyed by a combination of deluge and volcanic cataclysms. Escaping through great caverns and tunnel systems, the ancestors of the Apache came to high mountain lands far to the south, where they built new cities. A series of misfortunes there, however, eventually drove them northward. This legend is nearly identical to the origin story as related in the Chilam Bilam of the Maya, and brings to mind both Mayan and Aztec origin myths. The Aztecs say they originated in a land called Aztlan, obviously synonymous with Atlan or Atlantis, the destruction of which they also escaped. After this they ended up in a cavern world called Chico Moztoc, or the 7 cavern cities of gold, where they lived for some time before emerging again into the surface world. In addition to believing in a vast 9-layered underworld filled with strange beings, the chief god of the Maya, called Itzamna, meaning iguana house, was depicted as an anthropomorphic lizard, snake, caiman or dragon. The underworld dwellers were a mixture of human, reptilian and other animal characteristics, and the rain god, Chak, was a long-nosed, fanged humanoid creature very similar to the Egyptian god Set. The Hopi of the southwest desert, descendants of the mysterious Anasazi people, have an equally strange tradition. They believe that as a people they migrated from a series of previously extant worlds, usually interpreted as ages or epochs, but they also see these as subsequent cavern worlds, each one lower than the next, and each one eventually abandoned and destroyed in turn. While still in the murky third world, the Hopi ancestors came into contact with the mysterious Ant People, an ectomorphic race or species which greatly resembles the Gala of Sumerian myth, and at some point they also came into conflict with the Serpent People. Like other tribes, their underworld mythos is filled with cataclysms and floods. At least one of their previous worlds was said to have been in the east. Combined with the flood element, this legend is very similar to Apache and Aztec traditions. The Choctaw people of Mississippi also have a myth of underground origins. They believe that their ancestors emerged from the Nani Waya cave mound, a 50-foot tall natural geological formation which is hidden in a swampy forest area, approximately 1.5 miles east of a better-known artificial mound and tourist site. The hill has several natural openings, some of which have been sealed up. The park surface seems to have no good explanation for this, and it is said by the Choctaw to be the entrance to a vast underground realm. Today the Choctaw still believe that a variety of strange supernatural beings either inhabit the cave mound or dwell in the wooded hills that surround it. The Shampi is a sort of Sasquatch, but the underworld connection is there. Also present are the Kawana Kasha, Kawi Anukashar, also called Bopolai, Stone Thrower, a type of supernatural and mercurial dwarf living within not just the woods of Mississippi, but within the cave mound itself. Another variant is the Nalusa Chito, or Big Black Being, who emerges from underground dens to capture women and children, presumably for food. This abduction scenario is by now a familiar one, and is very similar to the abduction and changeling accounts of Celtic and Scandinavian traditions, which often describe abductions for the purposes of maintaining genetic diversity. The goblin Ho-Koklanote She is a shape-shifting creature believed to haunt the region and is very similar to the Puka or Buka of the British Isles. So why is it that there are numerous accounts of such creatures worldwide? And why is it that there are constant similarities with not only the descriptions but also the names? As always, we open up more questions than answers as we enter the realms of fantasy, but rest assured, where there is smoke there is fire, and there may be some hidden truths here that do not match with our shared understanding of reality.
On April the 5th, 1909, there appeared an anonymous front-page story in the Phoenix newspaper, the Arizona Gazette, with the title, "Explorations in the Grand Canyon." The article described a Smithsonian Institute-funded archaeological expedition under the direction of Professor S.A. Jordan, accompanied by an explorer in the service of the Smithsonian called G.E. Kincaid. The Gazette claimed that the team had found a vast underground citadel within the Grand Canyon, which was not the only oldest archaeological discovery in the United States, but one of the most valuable in the world. Kincaid's narration of the discovery in the Gazette described how he made the discovery whilst traveling alone in a wooden boat down the Colorado River from Green River, Wyoming to Yuma looking for minerals. He noticed stains in the sedimentary formation about 2,000 feet above the riverbed. He then, with great difficulty, made his way up the canyon wall to arrive at a small cave opening which had steps leading down from it. Kincaid passed through the entrance, and at a cross chamber 100 feet from the entrance, he found a carved image of a cross-legged idol, which he thought resembled Buddha and was probably of Tibetan origin. There were numerous side passages and rooms and various artifacts, including copper tools, urns and cups of copper and gold, enameled and glazed pottery vessels, engraved yellow stones strewn all over the floors, and an unknown grey metal resembling platinum. He also found hieroglyphics, which he believed were of an Egyptian or Oriental type. Kincaid surmised that more than 50,000 people could have been comfortably accommodated within the caverns. The newspaper mentioned that some of the artifacts were shipped off to Washington and that the Smithsonian Institute, under the direction of Professor S.A. Jordan, was carefully investigating the citadel. The discoveries, they claimed, almost conclusively prove that the race which inhabited this mysterious cavern was of Oriental origin, possibly from Egypt, tracing back to Ramses. After May 1909, there is a complete silence on the subject, until the article was rediscovered by ancient mysteries writer David Hatcher Childress and published in a conspiracy magazine, Nexus. It subsequently found its way onto the internet, and the Egyptians in the Grand Canyon story has now been used by hundreds of websites. In January 2000, researchers into the mystery contacted the Smithsonian Institution on the subject. They were told that over the years, the institution had received many inquiries about the 1909 newspaper article, but that its Department of Anthropology could find no mention in its files of a Professor Jordan Kincaid or a lost Egyptian civilization in Arizona. Researchers did turn up mention of a Professor S.A. Jordan, spelled with an O, not an A, but he was not an American archaeologist, but a European one. However, for many people, this is proof that the entire discovery has been covered up. They point to the many unexplored caves, tunnels and holes in the canyon, and the fact that much of the area around where Kincaid allegedly made his discovery is now government property and closed to the public. This is certainly true of the 400-foot deep Stanton's Cave, which, when excavated, was found to contain thousands of ancient Indian artifacts and the remains of 10,000-year-old giant Californian condors. It is a significant archaeological and paleontological site and is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This cave, along with some others in the area, is now sealed off from the public with a huge steel gate. The sinister reason behind this? To protect the colony of Townsend's big-eared bats living in the cave from being disturbed by visitors. Another curious feature of the Grand Canyon is the wide variety of Oriental and Egyptian names given to many of its peaks and buttes, particularly in the area of Kincaid's strange caverns. Around 94 Mile Creek and Trinity Creek, there are names like Isis Temple, Tower of Set, Tower of Ra, Horus Temple, Osiris Temple, whilst in the haunted canyon area we have the Cheops Pyramid, the Buddha Cloister, Buddha Temple, Manu Temple and Shiva. Perhaps the mysterious origin of these names gives a clue to the location of Kincaid's hidden treasure. However, the explanation for the names would seem to be far more prosaic. It comes in the form of Clarence E. Dutton, captain of ordnance in the U.S. Army, where most important work, the Tertiary History of the Grand Canyon District, appeared in 1882. It was he who, noting the similarities between the Grand Canyon peaks and some of the great architectural works of mankind, gave the Grand Canyon most of its exotic names. The remainder were named by Francois Mathis, a government cartographer, who in the spring of 1902 undertook the topographic mapping of the Grand Canyon for the U.S. Geological Survey. There is no mystery about this. Most decent histories of the Grand Canyon, Frommer's Grand Canyon National Park and Stephen J. Pine's How the Canyon Became Grand, for example, give these facts. Indeed, it is more than possible that the Egyptian and Indian place names of the Grand Canyon provided part of the inspiration for the Gazette article. But is the article anything other than a simple newspaper hoax? Many details of the article do suggest this. First of all, nobody has ever seen the photographs Kincaid is alleged to have taken in the caverns or the artifacts he apparently retrieved. Surely, over a period of more than 90 years, someone would have seen them. Another problem is the lack of documentary evidence to back up the existence of either G.E. Kincaid or Professor S.A. Jordan. Added to this, in the May 1909 article, the Gazette refers to the Smithsonian as an institute instead of an institution. Many websites using the story have copied this error. It is surely fair to suggest that anyone employed by them would know the difference. A further error in the article in the statement that Kincaid was the first white child born in Idaho. In fact, this was Eliza Spaulding, born at Lapwai on November 5, 1837, to Henry and Eliza Spaulding. Some researchers have suggested that the story of the Grand Canyon discoveries should not be taken literally and point to the Hopi Indian legend of ancestors that once lived in an underworld in the Grand Canyon as probable inspiration. In 1869, Major John Wesley Powell led the first successful expedition down the Colorado River and through the then unknown region of the Grand Canyon. Interestingly enough, when Powell came upon a huge river called Redwall Cavern, he stated that if it were used as a theater, it would give seating to 50,000 people. Echoes of Kincaid's upwards of 50,000 people living in the caverns, perhaps. The Brown-Stanton expedition of 1889 may also have provided some inspiration. This was undertaken to survey a gorge in the Grand Canyon for possible railroad construction through the Colorado River into California. After 3 of the expedition drowned in Marble Canyon, the remainder decided it was impossible to continue and attempted to retreat. They approached the spectacular springs of Vassey's Paradise, and after scaling the limestone wall above the river, discovered a whole row of cliff dwellings, with pieces of broken pottery all over the cliff. Stanton decided to store their remaining supplies and found a cave in the limestone rock face about 160 feet above the river. From there, they followed a prehistoric trail up South Canyon and safety. It must also be borne in mind that in the late 19th and early 20th century, stories about fantastic lost lands such as Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu were rife. Kincaid's supposed career also seemed to be partly based on the explorer, antiquarian type of the era, exemplified in traveller, photographer, and amateur archaeologist Augustus Le Plongeon, 1825 to 1908. The idea of the lost land of Mu first appears in the works of Le Plongeon. Born in Jersey off the coast of Normandy, France, he led a colourful life which included photographing Mayan ruins in the Yucatan Peninsula, working as a surveyor in San Francisco, and studying photography in London. It is in such accounts of the early explorers of the Grand Canyon, the intrepid archaeologists and antiquarians of the era, and in the Indian and Egyptian place names of the Grand Canyon, that the origins of G.E. Kincaid and the 1909 newspaper articles can be found, rather than in real discoveries inside some mysterious lost caverns. Glaciers are a result of climate change, and they're revealing fascinating clues to ancient life in the Swiss Alps. A treasure trove of prehistoric artifacts have been revealed, dating as far back as 9,500 years ago. The fascinating discoveries, including a knotted string of plant fibers from 6,000 years ago, leather trousers and lace shoes from around 2800 BC, and a 2,000-year-old wooden doll. These are just a few examples of the hundreds of ancient objects found preserved in the ice. Otzi the Iceman. Right up until the early 1990s, it was generally believed that prehistoric people avoided the vast, daunting heights of the Alps, but a number of incredible finds have since been discovered from melting ice, indicating that mountain ranges like the Alps have been a hive of human activity for thousands of years. On a clear day in September 1991, high in the desolate Ostal Alps, close to the border between Italy and Austria, two German hikers, Helmut and Erikus Simon, made what was to prove to be one of the most incredible discoveries of the 20th century. Lying face down in the ice was a frozen body. Thinking they'd found the remains of a mountaineer who died in a fall, the couple informed the authorities, who arranged to visit the site the following day. During the melting of the glacier, it was not unusual to find bodies of climbers who had died in accidents in the area. 3 weeks earlier, the mummified remains of a man and woman who had set off hiking in 1934, never to be seen again, had been discovered. The following day, the Austrian police arrived at the site and began somewhat clumsily to remove the body from its frozen grave. The body was transported to the University of Innsbruck, where a careful examination revealed that it was definitely not a modern mountaineer. Radiocarbon dating showed that the remains were of a man who had died around 3300 BC in the late Neolithic period, and thus was the oldest preserved human body ever discovered. Further examinations of Otzi, as he had become known because he was found in the Ötztal Alps, followed, and it was determined that he was just over 5 feet 2 inches tall and between 40 and 50 years of age when he died. Initially, it was believed that Otzi had fallen victim to exposure or exhaustion while crossing the Alps and frozen to death. But X-ray examination in 2001 revealed that there was an arrowhead lodged in the Iceman's left shoulder, suggesting that he had probably bled to death after being shot through the back with an arrow. Analysis of his stomach contents revealed the remains of 2 meals, the last eaten about 8 hours before he died, and consisting of a piece of unleavened bread made of einkorn, wheat, some roots and red deer meat. Analysis of extremely well-preserved pollen from the intestines revealed that Otzi had died in the late spring or early summer. He also at one time had broken his nose and several ribs, perhaps after an altercation with rival hunters. His few remaining scalp hairs provide the earliest archaeological evidence for haircutting, and short blue lines on his skin had been variously interpreted as the earliest known tattoos or as scars remaining from a Neolithic therapeutic procedure. In February 2006, further light was thrown on the Iceman when Dr. Franco Rollo of the University of Camerino in Italy and colleagues examined mitochondrial DNA only inherited through the mother, taken from cells in the Iceman's intestines. The team's conclusion was that Otzi may have been infertile. Dr. Rollo hypothesized that the social implications of his not being able to father offspring may have been a factor in the circumstances which led to the death of the Iceman. Recently, a startling claim was made by Lorenzo Dal Re, director of the Archaeological Office of the Bolzano province. Dal Re believes that the Iceman's death may actually have been recorded on an ancient stone stele. The decorated stone, of roughly the same age as the Iceman, had been used to build the altar of a church in Lasis, a town close to the area where the discovery of Otzi was made. One of the many carvings on the stele shows an archer poised to fire an arrow into the back of another unarmed man who appears to be running away. Although there is no evidence to link the stone with the murder of the Iceman, the resemblance between the carved image and the death of Otzi is uncanny. More ancient finds in the Alps. Towards the end of the long hot summer of 2003, a Swiss couple were hiking across a melting glacier in Switzerland when they came across a piece of wood. There was such an unusual find so high up that they stopped to pick it up. They took it down the mountain with them and gave it to a local archaeological department to look at. After careful examination and carbon dating, it was revealed that the piece of wood was an arrow quiver made of birch bark dating to around 3000 BC. A team of archaeologists visited the spot soon after, and more artifacts were discovered. Albert Hafner, chief archaeologist with the canton of Bern, explained the importance of the discoveries. Finds in the Alps are very rare anyway, but this is unique. We don't know of a quiver like this anywhere else in the world. We now have the complete bow equipment, quiver and arrows, and we have surprisingly a lot of organic material like leather, parts of shoes and a trouser leg that we wouldn't normally find. The bow, quiver and arrows are believed to have once belonged to a Neolithic hunter who lost them somehow about 5,000 years ago. These finds were not unique. Between 2003 and 2010, numerous archaeological finds were recovered from a melting ice patch in a glacier in the Bernese Alps, Switzerland. These finds from the Neolithic period, the Early Bronze Age, the Iron Age, Roman times and Middle Ages, spanning a period of 6,000 years. At an altitude of 9,000 feet, there's a pass in the Wildhorn region of the western Bernese Alps, and it's yielded some of the earliest evidence of Neolithic human activity in the high altitude of the Alps. The profuse assemblage of finds contains many artifacts, mainly from organic materials like leather, wood, bark and fibers. The site obviously provided access to high mountain areas as early as the 5th millennium BC, and the chronological distribution of the finds suggests that the pass was used mainly during periods when glaciers were retreating. There have been many valuable archaeological sites discovered in recent decades from rapidly melting glacier ice, leading to a new field of research, glacier archaeology. With rising temperatures caused by global warming, glaciologists predict that a staggering 95% of the 4,000 glaciers scattered throughout the Alps could disappear by the end of this century. Latest discoveries. In September 2020, archaeologist Marcel Cornelisson led an excavation team where their finds included a knotted string of plant fibers believed to be over 6,000 years old. But archaeologists are worried that they have an extremely short window of time in which to investigate these glacier sites. In 20 years at the most, the finds will have disappeared and the ice patches will be gone. In most cases, erosion destroys materials such as wood, bark, birch, leather and textiles. It was only because of the ice that these ancient artifacts have remained in such good condition. Melting glaciers in Norway. It's not just the Alps where melting glaciers are revealing archaeological sites. In April 2020, it was announced that melting glacial ice in Norway was revealing hundreds of Viking and other historical artifacts along the route of a long-lost ancient mountain pass. Archaeologists first discovered the lost pass, used by the Vikings as a trade route, in 2011 and have been discovering well-preserved archaeological finds ever since. Climate change is now causing the ice to melt at an increased rate, and much higher numbers of artifacts, which have lain hidden for centuries, have been found in recent months. But the archaeologists had to be quick in their work to find and recover the artifacts before they were damaged by exposure to the elements. Espen Finstad, one of the authors of a newly published study and co-director of the Glacier Archaeology Program, said that the preservation of the objects emerging from the ice was incredible, like they were lost a short time ago, not centuries or millennia ago. Archaeological work has shown that the pass in Lendbreen, central Norway, was used by farmers and travellers for 1,000 years, from the Nordic Iron Age around AD 200 to 300 until it ceased to be used after the Black Death in the 14th century. The majority of the finds, however, date from the period around AD 1000 during the Viking era. One incredible discovery, which was also captured on film, was an extremely rare Viking mitten made of different textiles. The mountain seems to have been used for both local traffic to and from summer farms at high elevations and for long-distance travel and trade. Perhaps the most impressive of the site's finds is a complete Iron Age tunic dating from AD 300, the oldest item of clothing ever discovered in Norway. Among the other finds are horseshoes, a horse snowshoe, sledge fragments, a walking stick inscribed with runes, a distaff, a tool used in wood spinning, and a tinderbox. Recent archaeological excavations at a Templar chapel in a remote area of Poland have revealed a hidden history beneath it. Using ground-penetrating radar, they have discovered tunnels and a crypt with remains underneath a 13th century building. Some researchers believe that this discovery may be connected to the story that the Holy Grail lies beneath the foundations of a remote chapel built by the Knights Templar in western Poland. The Knights Templar were a powerful order of crusading warrior monks founded in Jerusalem in AD 1118, ostensibly to protect Christian travelers to the Holy Land. Originally, the Templars were a group of 9 knights led by Hugues de Payens, a nobleman from the Champagne region of northeastern France who offered their services to King Baldwin II of Jerusalem after the recapture of the city during the First Crusade in 1099. The Knights Templar were established as a strict religious military order committed to poverty, chastity, and obedience, and the protection of pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land after the conquest. In 1118 AD, King Baldwin granted one wing of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a palace purportedly built on the foundations of the Temple of Solomon, to the Templars for their living quarters. It is from this association that the Templars became known as the Poor Knights of the Temple of Solomon. The Knights received the Church's official sanction at the Council of Troyes in 1128 and had their rules of conduct established by their patron, French Abbot St. Bernard of Clairvaux. Hugues de Payens, the first Grand Master of the Order, visited England in 1128 to raise money and find recruits for the Templars, and thus began the history of the English Knights of Templar. In 1130, de Payens returned to Palestine at the head of 300 knights, drawn mostly from France and England, and in the same year, Bernard of Clairvaux wrote in praise of the new knighthood to de Payens, a letter voicing his support for the order. In 1200, Pope Innocent III issued a papal bull which declared that all persons and goods within Knights Templar houses were immune from local laws. What this really meant was that the Templars were exempt from taxation and tithes. This was a vitally important point in the rapid accumulation of wealth the order enjoyed. Through their massive holdings in the West, the Templars amassed enough wealth to pay the large sums required to outfit their soldiers and supply staff in the Holy Land. Numerous fortifications were erected at strategical points throughout the Holy Land, using money acquired through donations and their vast commercial enterprises in Europe, which included the buying and leasing of land and property and the lending of money. Nevertheless, in spite of all these efforts, the bloody military struggles of the Templars against the numerically superior forces of Islam were to prove ultimately unsuccessful. In 1291, the remainder of the Templars were annihilated by more than 10,000 Mamluks at the city of Acre in western Galilee. With this defeat, the Christian hold on the Holy Land ended, and people in Europe began to doubt whether it was still God's will to send knights out to fight against Islam. The wealth and power enjoyed by the order, with its exemption from taxes and huge landholdings throughout Europe, made them many, often dangerous enemies. In the end, this was all to be their undoing. On Friday, October 1307, King Philip IV, the Fair of France, had all the Templars he could find in the country simultaneously arrested and imprisoned. Philip also seized all the knights' property and possessions, accusing the entire order of a variety of heretical crimes, including spitting and tramping on the cross and the worshipping of an idol. A number of the Templars were subsequently tortured by inquisitors until the required confessions were extracted and were then executed. In 1314, the remaining Templar leaders, including the last Grand Master Jacques de Molay, were burnt at the stake in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. The sudden end of the Knights Templar and the apparently complete disappearance of the order and its assets has fueled a large amount of legend and extreme theories involving the Knights. One of these theories is that the Templars, who escaped to Scotland after their persecution, established Scotch Rite Freemasonry. Other legends hypothesize on the nature of the alleged treasures of the Templars. As the Order occupied the Temple Mount in Jerusalem for a long period, it has been suggested that the Knights undertook their own excavations at the site and perhaps uncovered the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or even fragments of the true cross. One legend says that the Order found the Holy Grail beneath the Temple Mount and brought it with them to Scotland in the early 1300s. Apparently the Grail remains there today, buried somewhere beneath Rosslyn Chapel, a 15th century church in the village of Rosslane, Midlothian, another of the supposed Templar locations mentioned in the Da Vinci Code. Other legends link the Knights Templars and their treasures with various sites in Poland. In villages across the West Pomeranian region of Poland, 13th century Gothic buildings created by the Knights upon their return from the Holy Land attest to the Order's lasting influence. In September 2020, it was revealed that an ongoing archaeological dig at a Knights Templar chapel in a remote Polish village of about 100 residents was uncovering an array of fascinating discoveries. In the autumn of 2019, a research team using ground-penetrating radar, GPR, uncovered a number of crypts, as well as the remains of an underground tunnel while carrying out excavations at the Chapel of St. Stanislaus. The Chapel of St. Stanislaus was constructed in red brick on a granite base by the Templars, both as a place of worship and a defensive fortification in 1232. Inside the chapel, archaeologists investigating a small depression beneath the stone floors found 7 vaulted crypts, though it's not clear whether these were built by the Templars or date to a later period. The crypts are believed by some investigators to hold the remains of Templar knights buried beneath the chapel. They also believe that the crypt might be the resting place of the Holy Grail itself. After all, the Templars were generally known as the keepers of the Holy Grail. According to local legends and medieval documents, there was a well in the area of the chapel which may have served as an entrance to a secret underground tunnel. In fact, there is some evidence for a network of tunnels heading underneath the chapel and outwards to nearby villages and Templar sites, of which there are many in the surrounding area. Around 25 miles north of the Chapel of St. Stanislaus lies the Chapel of the Knights Templar in Roca, a rough stone building that dates from about 1250, built in the architectural style of the German Saxony region. Northeast of here are the well-preserved fortifications where historical documents place the Templars from around 1238. These fortifications were built in the 13th and 14th centuries. A secret underground tunnel runs beneath the town from the large church located at the market square to the Dominican monastery, which was formerly the location of a Templar castle. After the Templar Knights were expelled from the area at the end of the 13th century, their legendary treasure is said to have disappeared. According to local law, the treasury was sunk by the Templars themselves in a nearby lake. A local historian said, "The legend says that Templars, under cover of darkness, sunk a wooden box with golden coins and the Holy Grail into a since-dried lake mentioned in the stories, and the treasure has either been stolen or lost forever in the swamp." It's possible that these treasures were not stolen at all, but moved, perhaps by surviving Knights Templars at a later date when their persecution was long over. A number of investigators believe that all the Templar sites in the area may be connected by secret underground tunnels. Perhaps the complex treasures from all of these Templar sites may be concealed somewhere in this underground complex, possibly in the crypt between the Chapel of St. Stanislaus or at one of the other Templar chapels in the area. Though excavations and renovations of the chapel have been going on for the last 16 years, it is only in the last year or so that the most interesting discoveries have been made. Excavations at the site are ongoing, and new discoveries are being made regularly in this fascinating place. Perhaps these discoveries will one day shed more light upon the Templars and what they were hiding in the secret tunnels and crypts below the chapel. Mount Shasta, located in Northern California, has long been a sacred place for Native American populations in the area. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Shasta has also become home to a booming New Age tourist industry, and reports of UFOs, mysterious apparitions, and Bigfoot are rife. There's also a story that a secret Lemurian city lies inside the mountain, with its strange residents even being reported as visiting one of the local towns. But what lies behind these reports? Does the mountain itself possess certain energies which attract or create strange phenomena? Mount Shasta. Rising majestically to 14,179 feet above sea level and dominating the surrounding forests and plains, Mount Shasta is a double-peaked mountain, the second highest volcano in the US. Mount Shasta is part of the Cascade Mountain Range located in the county of Northern California and was probably named after a local Indian tribe, the Shasta. Perhaps because of its prominence in the landscape, the mountain has acquired an important place in the legends and religious practices of a number of Native American tribes. The Shasta people believe that Sharia, Old Man Above, created Mount Shasta when the earth was new and the land flat. He bored a large hole in the sky through which he pushed down masses of snow and ice, and until a huge mountain was formed which rose up into the clouds. He then climbed down from the clouds through the hole he had made and onto the peak of Shasta. The sun shone through the hole and melted the ice and snow, so he was able to plant the first trees. He created birds by blowing on the leaves which fell from the trees, and from the small twigs broken off from his great walking stick, he made fish which he placed in the mountain streams. From the rest of his walking stick, he created other animals including the beaver, the otter, and the grizzly bear. The grizzly bear created could walk on its hind legs and talk, and was so ferocious that he made it live at the bottom of the mountain. Frederick Spencer Oliver. Mount Shasta has also inspired a considerable amount of legend, folklore, and visionary experience of a non-Native American type. In the 1880s, Frederick Spencer Oliver, a teenage resident just to the north of Mount Shasta, wrote a fantasy novel called A Dweller on Two Planets, or The Dividing of the Way, which was first published in 1905. Spencer Oliver believed the book was dictated to him by a spirit. In this book, which is the origin of much of the esoteric and New Age lore that surrounds Mount Shasta, the I Am movement, an organization founded in the 1930s, believes that they are receiving instructions for humanity from the Ascended Masters, took the idea of a mystic brotherhood on Mount Shasta from Oliver's book. The founder of the cult, American mining engineer Guy Warren Ballard, wrote, using the pseudonym Godfrey Ray King, in his 1934 book Unveiled Mysteries, was that while hiking on the slopes of Mount Shasta in 1930, he met the Ascended Master Saint-Germain, who asked him to become the messenger for the Ascended Masters of the Great White Brotherhood who lived on Mount Shasta. The basis for the popular legend of the secret Lemurian city inside Mount Shasta also comes from a dweller on two planets. In the book, Oliver maintains that Lemurians journeyed to Mount Shasta after their continent sank beneath the Pacific Ocean and made their home inside the mountain in a network of jewel-encrusted tunnels. Further writings perpetuated the Lemuria-Shasta connection, one of which was a two-page magazine article by Selvius entitled Descendants of Lemuria, a description of an ancient cult in California, published in 1925. In 1931, a book called Lemuria, the Lost Continent of the Pacific appeared. One chapter in this book, Present-Day Mystic Lemurians in California, brought new fame to the Lemurians living in caverns beneath Mount Shasta legend. The book also added new information to the tale, mentioning tall, graceful, and agile Lemurians visiting one of the smaller towns in the Shasta area, trade nuggets and gold dust for some modern commodities. UFOs and strange lights. Once the property of the Lemurians, the network of tunnels beneath Mount Shasta now belong to aliens and lead to a UFO base there, and perhaps even form part of a worldwide tunnel network. But there have been numerous genuine reports of unexplained light phenomena on or near Mount Shasta on occasion. An English researcher and writer, Paul Devereux, notes in his book, Earthlight's Revelation, the Cascade Mountain Range, of which Mount Shasta is a part, is located on a tectonic plate margin where the majority of earthquakes and volcanoes occur, as graphically illustrated by the catastrophic 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. Before Mount St. Helens erupted, there were reports of luminous displays, including eerie blue lightning in the area. It was over another part of the Cascades, Mount Rainier, only 60 miles from Mount St. Helens, in 1947 that Kenneth Arnold saw the flashing objects that were to become the archetypal flying saucers. Bigfoot. Another legend associated with Mount Shasta is that of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Some researchers believe that Native American mythology contains references supporting the existence of Bigfoot, but there are no ape-like hominids in the canon of Native American mythology. However, as in the legends and folklore of most cultures, there are man-made giants, though these creatures cannot be linked directly to sightings of Bigfoot in the modern era. Nevertheless, sightings of a Bigfoot-type creature on Mount Shasta do occur. One 19th century Sasquatch report first appeared in Many Smokes, a National American Indian magazine, in 1968, under the title Encounters with the Matacagmi, and was reprinted in the magazine Info Journal for spring 1970. The article was apparently written by the grandson of the witness. The first meeting with the Sasquatch, there are a number of encounters described in the article, is supposed to have occurred between the grandfather of the writer, a Modoc Indian, and the Sasquatch just north of Mount Shasta, near Tule Lake, in the summer of 1897. On other occasions, the Sasquatch, given the name Matacagmi in the article, would leave fresh deer skins, wood or fuel, wild berries and fruits for the grandfather. In a further encounter a few years later, the Modoc man was bitten by a rattlesnake on Mount Shasta and fainted. When he recovered, he saw 3 8 to 10 feet tall creatures standing around him, one of which had made a small cut and removed the venom from his wound and covered the bite with cool moss. One of the Matacagmi then carried the man down the mountains and put him under a tree and left. The name used to refer to the creature Matacagmi is strikingly similar to the Tibetan term Meto Kangmi. Meto means man-bear, and Kangmi translates as snowman, used to describe the abominable snowman or yeti. There are a number of 20th century reports of a Bigfoot Sasquatch-type creature on the mountain, though details are often sketchy. In the summer of 1962, a woman named Bonnie Feldman stared in astonishment from the porch of her trailer on the east side of Mount Shasta while a female Bigfoot gave birth next to the base of an upturned pine tree. An undated report describes an incident at an altitude of around 8,000 feet, where 2 men drinking beer saw Bigfoot emerge from the forest and hand them a crystal before disappearing back into the woods. In 1980, hunters on the mountain caught a Bigfoot in the crosshairs of their rifles as he made his way across a field and entered some woods. They estimated the creature as being about 8 foot tall and weighing around 800 pounds. In 1986, a report from a team of naturalists described a Bigfoot walking across a field of berries at dawn. Recent mysteries. In August 1987, the reputation of Mount Shasta as a world-renowned spiritual power center was sealed when the Harmonic Convergence, a New Age spiritual event held at various sacred and mystical places all over the world, came to the slopes of the mountain. The event, which was attended by between 3,000 and 5,000 people, was intended to herald a new phase of universal peace and harmony in the world. It also inspired the creation of a new piece of folklore when, during the event, a Miss Butcher of Mount Shasta City claimed to see a flaming white angel on her TV. The story spread quickly, and soon hordes of people were queuing at the door to get a glimpse of her holy TV. Some who saw the splodge of white light on the screen did indeed see an angel, while others saw Jesus and some a light being. However, when technicians at Shiloh Electronics in town examined the TV, they found that the problem was a faulty capacitor in the low-voltage power supply. The technicians even set up a TV at their store showing an identical angel on the screen and offered to install an angel on everyone's TV for $99.99. Surprisingly, there were no takers. A more recent mystery emerged a few years ago when a strange hole about 60 feet deep appeared on the side of Mount Shasta. It appeared to have been dug by hand at night using a crude pulley system to remove the dirt. The only clues the mysterious diggers left behind were a ladder, some buckets and a plastic water bottle. No further holes were discovered and nothing more was heard on the subject. Was someone looking for the underground city of the Lemurians? Or was it something much more materialistic, like ancient artifacts or even gold? In many places of our planet, there are mysterious creations formed by human hands, such as mazes and labyrinths. Since the Paleolithic age, mazes and spirals have been known to man. Ancient sun worshippers left us their images on stones and mammoth tusks, and later this form was repeated in temple rings, in ancient Russian embroidery, and in ritual dances. Today, we'll look at a very strange labyrinth in Russia. Velosovka is a village in the Gribonovetsky district of Voronezh region, 142 kilometers southeast from the city of Tambov, 600 kilometers south of Moscow. It's part of the Bolsha-Alabushka settlement and was founded in the middle of the 18th century by the presence of Ukrainian origin, settled in the area by Count Warren Soff. Velosovka is a small village, but for the local places in the area, it can be said that it is a strategically located village. If you look for information on the Velosovka labyrinth on the Russian internet sites, you'll get very sensational results. Secrets of dwarfs from the labyrinth and legends of sorcerers, slayers, and magicians, along with mysterious and nasty tiny humanoids. There is also a skull with evidence of trepanation of a triangular shape. Trepanation refers to an ancient surgical intervention in which a hole is drilled or scraped into the human skull. There are also stories about dangerous Soviet archaeologists waiting at the excavations and reluctant locals who warned against disturbing local mounds. There were breakdowns of equipment and the decapitated head of a horse that was left at the camp of some of the archaeologists. Some of them finally fled the area in fear, but others died under mysterious circumstances. Also added to the mix was the story of the Soviet military pilot who was shot over Mongolia in August of 1945. The pilot was actually from the same general area as the Velosovka labyrinth. He survived, but was imprisoned by humanoid creatures no taller than 45 centimeters. When he finally escaped back to the world as we know it, X-rays were taken of the pilot that showed he had a triangular aperture in his skull, the same shape as the skull discovered in the Velosovka labyrinth. Well, such internet tales are basically hoaxes, fake stories surrounding a very unusual discovery made by Soviet archaeologists, and the research continued for some years. It's not just to create money for the Russian tabloids when stories like that are published. According to the archaeologists, these stories come from malicious intent, with the objective being to obfuscate the find and maybe to keep away any curious members of the population. Unfortunately for Russia, the area had been and still is being targeted by the so-called outlaw archaeologists. These Chornyik archaeologists, as they're referred to in Russian, raided the mounds or kurgan, stole the contents, and later sold them to private collectors. Understandably, there's a question about the lost expedition of the Nikolai Proharov and Irina Piskarova, if they ever existed, or more precisely, what if some group that were interested in the labyrinth for whatever reasons acted under their own names? It seems there are never easy cases from Russia, but it's possible that this was a complicated hoax to steer genuine archaeologists and others away. So let us look closely at the Velosovka discoveries and mysteries. One of the people who helped to reveal the facts was researcher of historical sciences, associate professor of the Department of Russian History of Voronezh State Pedagogical University, Valery Beryzutsky. He wrote articles about the discovery back in 1991 in the Soviet archaeological magazine, issue number 3. Then after the hoax became disseminated in a local newspaper, he also published an article and was interviewed by a major Russian newspaper. Looking at other sources, it was unveiled that it was Beryzutsky who organized and participated in the excavation of mounds near the village of Velovska from 1985 to 1996, along with students of the archaeological expedition of the Pedagogical University. An underground labyrinth was discovered by Voronezh archaeologists in the 1980s. The findings of the Voronezh researchers in the barrows or molds or kurgans near Volovska are really unique. So far, the first excavations in 1985 revealed evidence of the Bronze Age from the 3rd to 2nd millennia BC. On one of the Volovska mounds, they encountered an ancient ritual belonging to the tribes who lived in the Bronze Age. The structures of the graves of the creators were tightly clogged up with clay, and as usual it was sheer chance that helped them discover these structures and explore them. At the bottom of the grave pit, there were indeed the skeletons of buried people. Other amazing finds were also made there. A flute, which was made from the tubular bones of a large bird, intricately decorated clay vessels and bone ornaments. About 20 mounds were studied. Unique data was obtained about the Bronze Age, nomads of the Roman Empire, Sarmat, and the nomads of the Golden Horde era of the 13th and 14th century when the Mongols invaded Europe. In 1988, during the excavation of one of the mounds, the archaeologists found a large grave site measuring somewhere around 8 by 8 meters. The find promised something out of the ordinary. In addition to the find, scattered throughout the embankment were fragments of Crimean amphoria and traces of wakes for the deceased. As a result, the remains of a complex underground structure were found. In its center was a large square-shaped pit, obviously once designed to install a wooden or stone pillar. Was it for an idol? Several small human bones lay on the floor of the pit, and the shape and structure of the pit resembled a yurt with its domed ceiling. Leading off the pit were numerous narrow, winding passageways which led together to form a labyrinth. Some of the passages were underground and some were open, but the center of the building could only be accessed on all fours. In the passages they found fragments of ancient dishes, Crimean amphora and jugs. There were also sheep bones and several skulls of horses and front limbs. A yurt, or yurta for those who don't know, is a portable round tent covered with skins or felt and is used as a dwelling by several distinct nomadic groups in the steppes of Central Asia. The structure consists of an angled assembly, or lattice work of wood or bamboo for walls, the ribs of a door frame, poles, rafters, and a crown wheel compression ring, possibly steam band. One of the horse skulls contained iron rods with pitchings, metal rods inserted into holes for better horse control possibly. The horse bit shanks allowed the researchers to establish the time of the creation of the labyrinth, which was from the 8th to the 9th century AD. This is the time period of the domination of the tribes of the Hazar Kaganath or Kagani. Is it possible that the Iranians, Bulgarians, Hazars themselves, or smaller nomadic Turkic groups created the mysterious structure? Or was it created by some other tribe now forgotten? The findings of the archaeologists allowed them to come to this conclusion. In the center of the labyrinth there was evidence of ceremonial actions, the ritual sacrifice of horses, sheep and human beings. After the rites were performed, the creators of the labyrinth completely covered it with earth. The labyrinth is unique. There are no similar ones in Europe or Asia. Russian archaeologists Shin-Au-Av and Vinyikov suggested that the Velosovka labyrinth may have been the place of initiation into adult age by members of society. They possibly used the labyrinth to initiate the young men and women of the community into adulthood. Judging the findings there, the priests performed various rituals, including sacrifices, although human remnants may have been brought there for other purposes. Tangled passages, according to archaeologists, served for the ritual of initiation into the introduction of a human being to the pagan religion, a kind of trial for young men or women, if you will. The subject, who would have been in complete darkness, had to find his or way to the center of the labyrinth, where the priest would have conducted the rite of initiation. So it looks like the Velosovka labyrinth has nothing to do with dwarves or inhabitants of Atlantis, but it carries a lot of mysteries concerning the rites that were performed there. To summarize, nothing has really been excavated officially since 1996. The outlaw archaeologists had worked in the area and, of course, appropriated artifacts. They still operate in the Voronezh regional area, probably around Vlasov-Katul, looking for more mounds. Israeli archaeologists have discovered evidence of what they describe as a magnificent palace from the era of a biblical Jewish kingdom in Jerusalem. Intricately carved stone structures and other ruins associated with such a building were found about 2 miles south of Jerusalem's Old City. Experts are baffled, however, as to why some of the priceless artifacts at the palace were carefully buried while others were not. In September of 2020, the Israel Antiquities Authority, IAA, announced that archaeologists in southern Jerusalem had discovered the ruins of a luxurious 2,700-year-old palace. The finds were unearthed along a ridge near Armon Hanat Ziv Promenade, which overlooks most of Jerusalem, and included 3 ornate limestone column capitals, jugs, cooking pots, lamps, and dozens of stone artifacts, including pieces of lavish window frames. According to a statement from the IAA, the column capitals, identified with royal construction of the First Temple period, that's the 10th to the 6th century BC, are the most beautiful and impressive that have been uncovered to date. One important and puzzling aspect of the discovery, which surprised the archaeologists, was that 2 of the 3 capitals were found neatly buried, one on top of the other. Whoever lived at the affluent palace, perhaps a Judean king or one of Jerusalem's wealthier residents, they were very careful to preserve the column heads. But at this stage, no one is sure why they did this. The professor director of the excavation said, "Was it a matter of sanctity? Someone didn't want them to be desecrated. For now, we don't know. At this point, it is still difficult to say who hid the capitals in the way they were discovered and why he did so. But there is no doubt that this is one of the mysteries at this unique site to which we will try to offer a solution." Based on the capital's designs, the research team dated the fascinating discoveries to the time of the biblical First Temple, which was allegedly built by King Solomon around 1006 BC. They believe that the grand palace represented by these remains, which would have overlooked King Solomon's temple, was at its peak during the early 7th century BC, but was probably destroyed during the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem in 586 BC. The excavators believed what they discovered is unique. The professor said this is a first-time discovery of scaled-down models of the giant proto-alien capitals of the king found thus far in the kingdom of Judah and Israel, where they were incorporated above the royal palace gates. The level of workmanship on these capitals is the best seen to date, and the degree of preservation of the items is rare. The column head design discovered on the remains will be familiar to Israelis, as it is the same as the one adorning the 5-shekel coin of the modern State of Israel, used as a tribute to the First Temple era. Experts believe the residence was constructed between the reign of kings Hezekiah and Josiah, after the Assyrian siege of the city had finished. At the time, residents of Jerusalem ventured outside the walled city of David to expand the city. According to the professor, this find, alongside the palace that was found in the past at Ramat Rachel and the administrative center found on the slopes of Arnona, attest to the revival of the city and leaving the walled areas of the First Temple era after the Assyrian siege. We find villas, mansions, and government buildings in the unwalled areas outside the city, and this attests to the relief felt by the residents of the city after the siege was lifted. The work at this newly discovered palace site are not the only excavations in Jerusalem to have made the news over the last year or so. In December 2019, a National Geographic article revealed that controversial excavations under the Holy City had uncovered multiple layers of history and also stoked long-standing tensions. Israel claims the $11 million excavations below Silwan in the Old City of Jerusalem are concerned only with discovering traces of the 3 millennia-old First and Second Jewish temples, which Jews believe to have been located where the Al-Aqsa Mosque now stands. The archaeological project is now the subject of global controversy, with at least 45,000 Palestinians living in Silwan. Many people believe that the City of David project and other archaeological digs are part of Israel's efforts to strengthen its physical and political hold over the neighborhoods around Jerusalem's Old City and to cement the position of over 400 Jewish settlers living in Silwan in violation of international law. More archaeological controversy is just what lies beneath the Temple Mount. According to the Bible and the Torah, Solomon's Temple, also known as the First Temple, was the first Jewish temple in Jerusalem. The huge, exquisitely built structure was located on the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif Noble Sanctuary, which is associated with the biblical Mount Moriah, the place where Abraham offered up his son in sacrifice to God. According to the Book of Kings, Solomon is said to have secreted the Ark of the Covenant containing the Ten Commandments in a Holy of Holies in the temple. The Ark subsequently disappeared when the First Temple was plundered and burnt to the ground in the 6th century BC by the Babylonians. The structure was later rebuilt as the Second Temple, which stood from 516 BC until AD 70, when it was destroyed by the Romans during the First Jewish-Roman War. Muslims call the Temple Mount the Noble Sanctuary. They believed it was this place that the Prophet Muhammad ascended to the divine presence on the back of a winged horse, the miraculous night journey commemorated by one of Islam's architectural masterpieces, the Dome of the Rock Shrine. The problem is that there's no hard archaeological evidence for the First Temple. The only surviving sources for the First Temple of Jerusalem are descriptions in the biblical book of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, and Ezekiel. The temple would have measured about 90 feet in length, 30 feet in width, and 45 feet high. The Book of Kings says that the ceiling of the house was made of beams and planks of cedar, and the floors with boards of cypress. The huge quantities of cedar were sent by King Hiram of Tyre, an ancient Phoenician city in modern-day Lebanon. Solomon built within the structure an inner sanctuary of wood overlaid with gold. No stone was used for this room, which was known as the Most Holy Place. The inner sanctuary was constructed to receive the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, which was accompanied by 2 huge cherubim carved from olive wood and covered in gold. According to biblical accounts, in the 10th century BC, after capturing the city of Jerusalem, King David chose an area of land in a high place outside the city walls to build a sanctuary to God, an area that the Bible calls Mount Moriah. But it was to be David's son Solomon who would complete the construction of the First Temple in 960 BC. As well as serving as a home for the Ark of the Covenant, the temple became an important religious center, especially after the king of Judah from 641 to 609 outlawed worship at all other sanctuaries and established Solomon's temple as the only acceptable place for sacrifice in the kingdom of Judah. The Temple Mount has always been somewhat of a territorial prize, occupied by a long series of peoples, including Israelites, Babylonians, Greeks, Persians, Romans, Byzantines, early Muslims, Crusaders, Mamluks, Ottomans, and the British. Today, the Temple Mount is a walled compound within the old city of Jerusalem. During the various archaeological digs at the site over the years, Israeli archaeologists have claimed that some discoveries provide tangible evidence of biblical accounts. For example, fragments of terracotta figurines dating to between the 8th and 6th centuries BC might be evidence to support biblical descriptions of King Josiah, who ruled during the 7th century, initiating reforms that included a campaign against idolatry. Another significant find is a piece of black clay with a seal impression inscribed with the name in ancient Hebrew, son of Immer. In the book of Jeremiah, a son of Immer, Pashur, is identified as chief administrator of the First Temple. Could the Asher seal owner have been Pashur's brother? If so, it is an important discovery, the first Hebrew inscription from the First Temple period to be found on the mount itself. While such discoveries are interesting, they do not provide intraconvertible proof of the existence of the First Temple. However, excavations are ongoing at the Temple Mount, and a huge area of the site has not yet been investigated. According to Israeli archaeologist Dr. Gabriel Barkay, who leads the excavation team at the Temple Mount, we've been working for 6 years and we've gone through 20% of the material. We have another 15 to 20 years to go.
The legends, myths and literature of mankind have always been filled with fanciful or terrifying accounts of underground lands and races hidden from surface sight. Rumours of a largely unseen reality of cavern worlds, hidden tunnel systems which crisscross the globe, and the occasional accidental discovery of a large geode structure within the Earth have migrated from the realms of folklore and early scientific speculation into literature, and perhaps back into folklore again. When reading and studying the available fiction which touches upon the topic of a subterranean world, many similarities come to light. This is interesting insofar as the various writers were not necessarily familiar with one another's works. It is obvious that many of them drew upon folk tales and mythology, as well as the latest scientific findings and theories of the day. Indeed, they had a huge matrix of archetypes and forms with which to work. Religious traditions have also been a major influence on the development of fiction about subterranean worlds and inhabitants, and some brave souls have shared accounts of what they believe to be their own encounters with creatures that dwell within the Earth's crust. One of the earliest examples of subterranean stories is to be found in the Gilgamesh cycle of stories, which some would say is not so much fictitious as it is a distorted account of ancient events. Gilgamesh was an actual king who ruled Uruk, also called Unug, about 2600 BC, and he was supposedly of half-divine origin. Like other heroes of ancient mythic cycles who were demigods or semi-divine, Gilgamesh longed for immortality. In one tale from his cycle, he befriends a physically powerful, hairy, subhuman character named Enkidu and teaches him the customs of humanity. In a later tale, Enkidu, on behalf of his friend and king, agrees to venture into the underworld of ancient Mesopotamia to search for someone who has the secret of immortality. Other Sumerian accounts leave little doubt that the Ker or Kigal, the Great Below, was a place of immense size and great terror. The Kigal was said to be filled with a wide range of beings, including spirits and the undead, reanimated bodies of human beings, as well as savage guardians called scorpion men. Other residents were described as sexless and robotic artificial beings, called Galatur or Gala, who were used by the rulers of the underworld for missions of kidnapping human beings from the surface world or for other errands. Also present in the underworld were the Ataku, eagle-headed reptilian humanoids, who are probably the original jinn and ifrits of the ancient Middle East. Another strange race was the Pazuzu, a canine-faced humanoid monstrosity with reptilian scales and tail. All of these motifs, which in one form or another have been found to permeate nearly every ancient underworld tradition, and also have found their way into folklore and literature. The Asian region, particularly the Indian subcontinent, Tibet, Nepal, China and Japan, has very similar traditions about subterranean inhabitants. In India, there is still a strong belief in the reality of the Nagas, a race of serpent people, or lizard men, who have made their homes in two major underground cities or civilizations, Bhogavati and Patala. The Nagas are believed to have an affinity with water, and the entrances to their underground palaces are said to be hidden often at the bottom of wells, deep lakes and rivers. They are described as a very advanced race or species with a highly developed technology. The Nagas are also believed to harbour a disdain for human beings, whom they are said to abduct, torture, interbreed with and even eat. The interbreeding has supposedly led to a wide variety of forms, ranging from completely reptilian to nearly human in appearance. The Naga race is related to another underworld race, the Hindu demons, or Rakshasas. In China, the Lung Wang, dragon kings, closely resemble the Nagas in many respects. The Lung were said to dwell either in the celestial realm, i.e. the stars and planets, or beneath the surface of the earth. They too were said to possess a magical pearl in their forehead, a mystical or divine eye or source of power. Like the Nagars, some of the entrances to their palaces or kingdoms could be found beneath lakes and rivers or behind waterfalls. Almost always such entrances were well hidden from the intrusive eyes or feet of mortal men and women. One such entrance to the Chinese underworld was said to be in the eastern mountain of Taishan near Khufu province. This entrance to the Chinese hell was guarded by savage demons called Men Shen, often depicted as warriors wearing fierce animalistic masks or faces. There was also interaction between the Lords of Hell, as they were known, and the Dragon Kings. The 4 Hell Kings, called Yan Luo or Yan Wang, possibly derived from the Hindu death god Yama, ruled over a vast region consisting of 18 levels or locales. In one tale, a dragon king is robbed by an extremely clever and human-like monkey, who is similar in many respects to the Hindu Hanuman, who in turn came into conflict with the Rakshasas of the underworld in the Ramayana. The dragon king calls on the help of Yan Luo, who are in turn bested by Monkey as well. The Japanese hell is even more of an amalgam of different traditions, as it incorporates Chinese, Hindu and Buddhist characteristics into an earlier animistic Shinto system. Other beings are the Kappa, a semi-aquatic and totally reptilian-looking humanoid dwarf, the ugly girls of hell, and sundry other shape-shifting entities who dwell underground or under houses. The fox people are among the latter, often taking human form and delighting in abduction and seduction of mortals. The underworld of ancient Egypt has many things in common with its Mesopotamian counterpart. Called the Tuat or Duat, it was ruled by the god of the dead, Osiris, the counterpart of Sumer's Nagal. It is the servants of Osiris, however, who are of concern here. There was the jackal-headed god Khentimentiu and also Anubis, both gods of arcane knowledge, embalming and other sciences. The god of knowledge, Thoth, was also a regular in the Tuat. He had a humanoid form with the head of a baboon, but very canine in appearance. All 3 of these deities bear a strong resemblance to the Sumerian Pazuzu. There is also a parallel in the Ushabtiu, originally conceived as artificial, animated and robotic servants who were very similar to the Gala or Galatur of the Sumerian underworld. Like the Gala, the Ushabtiu could be dispatched to punish or abduct an ordinary mortal or even the pharaoh himself. These beings were represented in Egyptian burials by small statues of the same name, mimicking the supernatural servants of Osiris and hopefully providing a retinue of retainers and slaves for the deceased. Another being with familiar characteristics was Amut, a blend of crocodile, lion and dog. But possibly the most feared being to haunt the underworld was the god of chaos and strife, Set or Seth, who attempted to mount a coup d'etat against his brother Osiris. The hugest dragon of the Tuat, however, was the gigantic serpent Apophis, very similar to Nidhogg or Jumungand from the Norse underworlds, a monstrous serpent who brought fear even to the gods. Moving into Europe and Scandinavia, the mythical Subterraneans became less distant and more immediate, interacting with the common folk on a much more regular basis. Scandinavians had their trolls and giants or jotuns, also called etins, who were great granitic beings of immense physical power and sometimes hairy of form. More mysterious were the dwarves, a race or races of stunted, powerful craftsmen and weapons-smiths. One race of dwarves was from Svartalfheim, the land of the Dark Elves, a cavern world in its own right. Some of the Svartalf dwarf kind lived in Niflheim, the land of the dead. Along with the savage and man-eating trolls, the dwarves would turn to stone, into toads or otherwise die if struck by the direct rays of the sun. Like the trolls and dwarves, the elves seemed to dislike bright sunlight, but may have had more tolerance than their troll and dwarf cousins, as they were sometimes seen at dawn, twilight or dusk, or by day in deeply shadowed valleys or mountain chasms. The elves took a regular interest in human affairs, weddings, births and deaths, bloodlines, the success of crops and livestock and so forth, but only for their own selfish interests. They seemed to be overly concerned with genetic and biological diversity, and they pilfered livestock, crops and human genes via theft or cross-species liaison whenever they saw fit to do so. The elves are generally depicted as extremely fair-haired and fair-skinned. Dragons were also said to live deep in the earth, as recounted in the Anglo-Saxon Germanic saga of Beowulf. The monster Grendel was a hairy, scaled fiend, a Naga troll which later British traditions would call a goblin, and modern cryptozoologists would term a hairy humanoid. Dragons were the special guardians of buried treasure, that is, buried knowledge or technology, much of it often made by the powers of the subterranean dwarves. The European dragon had a nastier disposition than his Oriental counterpart, or perhaps he came into conflict with a group of people who entertained different philosophical ideals when it came to living in fear of man-eating entities. But whatever the case, like his eastern cousins, he had a relationship with both underground caverns and deep bodies of water. England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland have rich traditions of under-earth dwellers, with many similarities or even common origins between them, like the Norse Germanic variants, the fairies, goblins, trolls, knockers, brownies, leprechauns, she, Tuluath Teg, and numerous other categories of humanoid beings, were fair or foul, malevolent or kind, actually indifferent, making their homes almost without exception beneath the ground. Mounds, hills, ruins, ancient raths and hill forts, mountains, cliffs, and even cities of great age were said to serve as the rooftops of their palaces. Like the Nagars and dragons, some had the entrances to their subterranean homes at the bottom of lakes. To remove all doubt as to their relationship with Norse hidden folk and Indian Nagars alike, they shunned the sunlight and often seemed interested in crossbreeding their own bloodlines with those of human beings, or even in crossbreeding their livestock or fairy cattle, horses, hounds, and so forth with the surface species which were most compatible. The goblin dwarf Rumpelstiltskin, in his lust to have the human baby and its genetic bounty, is another example of this in German folklore. Of particular interest are the Tuatha De Danann of Ireland, the people of the goddess Danu, also called the She. Originally an aristocratic warrior race of heroic proportion, they dwindled in size after retreating underground to become the Daoine She, Thena She, or diminutive fairies of Irish folklore. Most of the gentry or aristocratic trooping fairies are said to be of this type. Like the Scandinavian elves, they are depicted as particularly fair of complexion and hair. According to Lady Wilde in Ancient Legends of Ireland, Ward and Downey, London 1887, they are categorized as cave fairies. In addition to their now familiar practice of abduction of and hybridization with surface humans, their name Tuatha, tribe or people, De Danann, holds a strong resemblance to the Egyptian name for the underworld, the Tuat. It is generally thought that the term fairy or faerie has its origin in the earlier French term fée or the Latin fatae, but the possibility of an older origin, as hinted at by the Tuat-Tuatha connection, may in fact bear further examination. For did not the pharaohs believe that they would journey through the Tuat on the way to their places in eternity? The hills and glens of Ireland are also said to hide the remnants of at least 3 vanquished races: the Firbolgs, the Fomorians, and the Numidians. All are the ancient enemies of the Tuatha De Danann and were driven underground by the latter in the distant past, where they then dwindled in size, lack of genetic diversity, at an even earlier time than did their conquerors. The Fomors and the Firbolgs are probably the origin race of many of the bogies and bukas, goblins and hobgoblins, Scottish trolls and other malevolent, sometimes shape-shifting beings which seem to bear strong resemblance to the Scandinavian trolls, being perhaps a smaller variant. The etymological connection between trolls and trolls is obvious and reflects the sequence of both legendary and historical migrations to the British Isles. Each group of fairies and goblins can be viewed as the dethroned, exiled gods of an earlier defeated human culture. The question is, what or who were these gods, which still exist in popular imagination today? Were they symbolic pantheons or archetypes, or living beings who predated man on this planet? The New World Native American cultures have similar beliefs in an extensive layered realm of caverns which is hidden beneath their feet. This murky world is believed to be inhabited by both human and humanoid beings and by a variety of monsters and demons. The Mescalero Apache have many of these beliefs. One of their oldest sacred traditions state that they came from the old Red Fire land before the Great Flood. This land is said to have been in the distant eastern Atlantic Sea, but was destroyed by a combination of deluge and volcanic cataclysms. Escaping through great caverns and tunnel systems, the ancestors of the Apache came to high mountain lands far to the south, where they built new cities. A series of misfortunes there, however, eventually drove them northward. This legend is nearly identical to the origin story as related in the Chilam Bilam of the Maya, and brings to mind both Mayan and Aztec origin myths. The Aztecs say they originated in a land called Aztlan, obviously synonymous with Atlan or Atlantis, the destruction of which they also escaped. After this, they ended up in a cavern world called Chico-Mozdoc, or the Seven Cavern Cities of Gold, where they lived for some time before emerging again into the surface world. In addition to believing in a vast 9-layered underworld filled with strange beings, the chief god of the Maya, called Itzamna, meaning iguana house, was depicted as an anthropomorphic lizard, snake, caiman or dragon. The underworld dwellers were a mixture of human, reptilian and other animal characteristics, and the rain god, Chak, was a long-nosed, fanged humanoid creature very similar to the Egyptian god Set. The Hopi of the southwest desert, descendants of the mysterious Anasazi people, have an equally strange tradition. They believe that as a people they migrated from a series of previously extant worlds, usually interpreted as ages or epochs, but they also see these as subsequent cavern worlds, each one lower than the next, and each one eventually abandoned and destroyed in turn. While still in the murky third world, the Hopi ancestors came into contact with the mysterious Ant people, an ectomorphic race or species which greatly resembles the Gala of Sumerian myth, and at some point they also came into conflict with the Serpent people. Like other tribes, their underworld mythos is filled with cataclysms and floods. At least one of their previous worlds was said to have been in the east. Combined with the flood element, this legend is very similar to Apache and Aztec traditions. The Choctaw people of Mississippi also have a myth of underground origins. They believe that their ancestors emerged from the Nani Waya cave mound, a 50-foot tall natural geological formation which is hidden in a swampy forest area, approximately 1.5 miles east of a better-known artificial mound and tourist site. The hill has several natural openings, some of which have been sealed up. The park surface seems to have no good explanation for this, and it is said by the Choctaw to be the entrance to a vast underground realm. Today, the Choctaw still believe that a variety of strange supernatural beings either inhabit the cave mound or dwell in the wooded hills that surround it. The Shampi is a sort of Sasquatch, but the underworld connection is there. Also present are the Kawana Kasha, Kawi Anukashar, also called Bopolai, Stone Thrower, a type of supernatural and mercurial dwarf living within not just the woods of Mississippi, but within the cave mound itself. Another variant is the Nalusa Chitto, or big black being, who emerges from underground dens to capture women and children, presumably for food. This abduction scenario is by now a familiar one, and is very similar to the abduction and changeling accounts of Celtic and Scandinavian traditions, which often describe abductions for the purposes of maintaining genetic diversity. The goblin Ho-Ko-Klanote, she, is a shape-shifting creature believed to haunt the region and is very similar to the Puka or Buka of the British Isles. So why is it that there are numerous accounts of such creatures worldwide? And why is it that there are constant similarities with not only the descriptions, but also the names? As always, we open up more questions than answers as we enter the realms of fantasy, but rest assured, where there is smoke, there is fire, and there may be some hidden truths here that do not match with our shared understanding of reality.